Chapter 668. This was not a big room. The table, bed, and other things were all covered in a layer of dust, a telling sign that no one had stayed here for a long time. Once he tidied up the place, Su Ming sat down on the bed and looked at the dark sky outside the window. His eyes sparkled. Gradually, a hint of a smile appeared on his lips. The power of the world here is thick. Su Ming had noticed it when he went up the mountain, and now that he was sitting here, he could sense the aura around him even more clearly. As expected of a sect, Su Ming had come to Evil Spirit Sect for 3 reasons. 1. To resolve the crisis facing Ugly Little Thing's family. 2. To help Ugly Little Thing find the cause of her brother's death. And 3. To recover his power as soon as possible. The thick aura in this place was incredibly helpful to the recovery of his cultivation base, but the resentment is too strong. Su Ming frowned. The power of the world in this place might be thick, but the resentment contained within was also thick. If he stayed here for a long period of time, his personality would definitely be affected. As he fell into silence, his gaze fell on the gourd. He saw the ghost face formed by the black smoke looking at him, as if it was smiling ferociously. It thought that Su Ming could not see it. After all, to it, Su Ming was just a mortal. Su Ming ignored the ghost face formed by the black smoke and opened the gourd. Immediately, an even thicker wave of resentment came crashing into his face. That resentment instantly filled the entire room, causing shrill screams to ring in Su Ming's ears. After some time, with a dark expression on his face, he poured out a medicinal core from the gourd. That medicinal core was entirely purplish black, and the resentment within it was so thick that it was terrifying. Yet strangely, when he brought the medicinal core to his nose and sniffed it, a medicinal fragrance seeped into his nostrils and turned into a refreshing scent. He shook the gourd a little. There seemed to be 100-something medicinal cores inside. Su Ming closed his eyes, and after a long while, he opened them slowly. A pensive look appeared briefly in his eyes. This is a very good, nourishing medicine. If a mortal takes it, they can strengthen their bodies and fill their veins with blood. Just was this Zhao Chong planning. A glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes, and he swallowed the medicinal core. He had been familiar with herbs since he was young, and he also had a lot of experience in creating medicinal pills. With just a sniff, he could roughly tell the effects of the medicinal cores. Since he could not tell what was wrong with Zhao Chong, then Su Ming decided to just swallow one. Once the pill entered his mouth, it turned into a wave of warmth that flowed through Su Ming's entire body. After a moment, a brilliant light shone in his eyes, and he brought out a few more pills. Once he swallowed them, his cultivation base seemed to have recovered a little more due to the medicinal cores. When it was late at night, Su Ming lay down on his bed. As he circulated his cultivation base, he pretended to sleep. When midnight arrived, the world outside was silent. Suddenly, the freezing air in the room became thicker, and a black shadow floated out from the wall by the side. That figure floated to Su Ming's bed like a ghost, as if he was observing him. Before long, shadows of ghosts like this floated out from all the walls around the room. Before long, there were dozens of these shadows floating around Su Ming's room. They floated around him, moving in and out of the room, but not a single sound could be heard from them. Su Ming narrowed his eyes. He lay on his bed and watched this scene. If he was really a child and could see this, then he would definitely be so terrified that he would tremble. But he was Su Ming. He only narrowed his eyes and watched them coldly. These were indeed ghosts, but by the looks of it, they seemed to have been here since a long time ago. They were continuously moving about, and no one knew what they were doing. This scene lasted for several hours. When the sky gradually brightened, all the ghosts floating in the air suddenly stopped moving and turned their heads to look at Su Ming. A murderous look appeared in their eyes. When they looked at Su Ming, their gazes seemed to have gained corporeal form. Almost at the instant they looked at him, the ghosts moved together and charged towards him. A glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes. He did not move and simply allowed the ghosts to surround him. Then he saw them sucking in a breath at the same time. With that one breath, Su Ming could clearly feel a hint of his life force being sucked away. A freezing glare shone in Su Ming's eyes. Once the ghost sucked away that hint of life force, they slowly retreated and returned to the walls around him, disappearing without a trace. At that moment, the sky had just become bright. This room is very interesting. Su Ming opened his eyes, and there was a slight chill in them. Once he looked at the walls around him, he averted his gaze and picked up the gourd on the ground to bring out medicinal cores and continue swallowing them. Time trickled by, and in the blink of an eye, 10 days went by. During them, Su Ming did not step out of the house, and Zhao Chong did not send any more messages to him. Everything was quiet. However, every single time night arrived, the ghost would appear, and every single time, they would come to Su Ming's side before daylight to absorb his life force before leaving. Fortunately, they only absorbed a hint of his life force, and it was not a huge problem for Su Ming. Besides, the medicinal cores he took were enough to replenish his life force. Most of Su Ming's time was spent absorbing the power of the world in this place, using it to heal his injuries. On this day, Su Ming completely swallowed the medicinal cores from a gourd. He cast a glance at the gourd, then picked it up. For the first time since he stepped into the house, he pushed open the door to the house, walked out, and stood in the courtyard. It was dusk at that moment, and the sky outside was dyed crimson. The afterglow of the setting sun shone on the ground, creating a rather beautiful sight. With the gourd in hand, Su Ming arrived in front of Zhao Chong's house and wrapped his fist in his palm to bow to him respectfully. "Greetings, master. I've finished eating the medicinal cores." To Su Ming, the medicinal cores were somewhat effective. They could make his recovery speed increase a little. It might not be much, but since there was a free medicinal core, he would naturally not let it go. Zhao Chong's house was filled with dead silence. After a moment, a hoarse voice traveled forth slowly. "Finished eating? That's 100 soul-nurturing pills. And you ate all of them in 10 days? Didn't I tell you to eat one every day?" For the first time, a hint of emotion could be heard in that voice. "Once I ate the medicinal cores, my body felt warm and comfortable, so I couldn't help myself and ate a little more," Su Ming said. No one knew what Zhao Chong was thinking at that moment, but after a moment of silence, a gust of fog flew out from the house and turned into a dried-up arm before Su Ming, grabbing his right hand. Su Ming laughed coldly in his heart, but his face remained pale on the surface. He simply allowed the arm to grab his right hand, and he felt a wave of freezing air rush into his body. It swam through his body once before it retreated. "There are 300 of them here. You don't eat them too quickly." As the freezing air retreated, the black fog also retreated. 3 gourds flew out from the house and landed under Su Ming's feet. "Thank you, master." Su Ming picked up the 3 gourds and walked towards the house, no longer bothering himself with Zhao Chong. This person is definitely after something. If that's the case, I might as well take more. Once he returned to the house, Su Ming sat down and opened the gourd to bring out the medicinal cores. Once he scrutinized them carefully, he swallowed them. Time trickled by, and soon 20 days went by. Su Ming had been an evil spirit sect for an entire month. During this month, the rate at which his cultivation base recovered had clearly surpassed what it had been in the past. With the help of the medicinal cores and the power of the world he absorbed in secret, his cultivation base had almost recovered to 1.5. On this day, he finished eating the medicinal cores once again. Su Ming stretched lazily, then got up with the 3 gourds in hand and went to Zhao Chong's door once again. "Master, I finished the medicinal cores again." This time, the silence in Zhao Chong's house was clearly much longer than the last time. There was also a hint of disbelief in the hoarse voice that traveled out. "That's 300 of them." "That's right. I ate them all." Su Ming nodded. "How many do you eat per day?" Zhao Chong's voice became much darker. "Sometimes I don't. Sometimes I eat dozens of them per day. The most I eat is 100, Su Ming answered honestly. Zhao Chong's house fell silent once again. After a long while, a cold harumph came from within. "Since you like these medicinal cores, then no matter how many you have, I'll let you eat as many as you want." When those words were spoken, A gigantic gourd that was about half the height of a person flew out from the open door of the house and landed before Su Ming with a bang. There are 2,000 of them here. If you have the ability, then eat them all in a month. Su Ming grinned and dragged the gourd into his room. Once he closed the door, he opened it and checked it before he resumed his life of recovering his cultivation base. However, a cold sneer appeared in his heart. Zhao Chong could tolerate this because he did not sense any ripples of power from Su Ming's body, and also because he could tell that Zhao Chong was definitely plotting something great. All right, let's see just where this person's limits lie. Life continued as usual, and in the blink of an eye, another month went by. Master, I finished the medicinal cores. Su Ming stood in the courtyard outside Zhao Chong's house with the empty gourd placed before him. He even patted it once, and a hollow sound came from it. Zhao Chong's house remained silent. When the time it takes for almost half an incense stick to burn past, 3 huge gourds flew out from the house. There were about 2,000 pills in each of them, and they landed before Su Ming. This time, Zhao Chong did not even seem to want to say anything. Another month went by. Master, I finished them again. Another month went by. Master, do you have more? Half a year passed. During this time, Su Ming would practically take a large amount of medicinal cores from Zhao Chong every month. There were already tens of thousands of them, and Su Ming ate more of them. The speed at which his cultivation base was recovering, along with the power of the world, had nearly reached 4/10 of his cultivation base. This sort of recovery allowed Su Ming to see hope. However, the effects of the medicinal cores were practically negligible. On this day, Su Ming went to Zhao Chong's house once again and said, Master, let's change to another type of medicinal core. The 3rd and 4th chapters, to be continued. If you like this work, please come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 669. Time passed by, and 8 months had passed since Su Ming came to Evil Spirit Sect. With the large amount of medicinal cores and the power of the world in this place, his level of cultivation had finally recovered to 5/10. However, the further he went, the slower his recovery speed became. Zhao Chong had already given him 3 different types of medicinal cores, and Su Ming had devoured a large amount of each of them. 3 days ago, when he went to get more medicinal cores, Zhao Chong told him that he had temporarily run out of medicinal cores. He still looked like he was 12 or 13 years old. He might have grown a little, but the change was not great. In fact, Su Ming had a feeling that he had returned to the past and could no longer return to his previous self. He could only slowly grow up in this destiny. To others, there was still not a single ripple of power coming from his body. Only those who had attained great completion in the Berserker Soul realm would be able to find some clues. However, there was only one person who had attained great completion in the Berserker Soul realm, keeping watch over Evil Spirit Sect, and he was in isolation all year long, not bothering himself with the matters of the world. That was why no one could tell Su Ming's level of cultivation. Zhao Chong was naturally the same, but he began to doubt Su Ming. During the past 8 months, the medicinal cores he had spent on Su Ming had practically drained his pockets dry, causing him to nearly go mad and kill Su Ming multiple times in the midst of his heartache. None of the disciples he had met in the past had been as strange as Su Ming. If he had not checked him multiple times and confirmed that Su Ming had indeed eaten them and was just a mortal, then he would have used an enchanted treasure to confirm whether Su Ming was hiding his level of cultivation. The answer he obtained in the end did not reveal anything about Su Ming possessing any cultivation base. However, the answer he obtained in the end did not reveal anything about Su Ming possessing any power. No matter how he looked at it, he was just a teenager who could eat a little. Otherwise, it would have been difficult for him to bear with the constant pain in his heart. A few days ago, he had almost used up all his medicinal cores. He could not bear to use the remaining ones on Su Ming, so he could only tell him in resignation that he did not have any medicinal cores for the time being. However, his heart did not ache entirely because of this. During the past 8 months, he had frequently observed Su Ming, and his heart ached in pain, but also looked forward to the matter of him eating so many medicinal cores. As for Su Ming, his cultivation base had recovered during the past 8 months, causing his divine sense to become much sharper than it was 8 months ago. He might not have left the courtyard, but everything in Evil Spirit Sect's outer sect had been scanned through it in secret with his divine sense, and he knew everything clearly. As for Zhao Chong, Su Ming would naturally not let him go. However, he could only see a thick layer of fog in Zhao Chong's room with his divine sense. That fog was filled with the stench of blood. He could also vaguely see a person sitting in his room, unmoving. In Su Ming's eyes, Zhao Chong's level of cultivation was also a little strange. At first glance, his level of cultivation seemed to be similar to that of transcendence. But if he took a closer look, he would find that there was a hint of ripples in him that belonged to Berserker Soul Realm. It was especially so since the other party had not done anything wrong during these 8 months. Instead, he had given Su Ming a large amount of medicinal cores. If he did not have these medicinal cores, Su Ming would have needed to spend a lot more time to restore all his Berserker bones. That was why Su Ming did not take the initiative to attack Zhao Chong. He wanted to see what this person would do once he crossed his bottom line and ran out of medicinal cores. On this day, 8.5 months after he came to Evil Spirit Sect, it was winter outside. Snow fell from the sky, and the ground was covered in a silver sheen. Even the moon shone with a silver light. The entire mountain was covered in a white coat of snow, and it was the same for the black halls. The perfect combination of black and white gave people the illusion that they were looking at an ink painting. The black smoke that seemed to exist eternally in the air was a permanent feature of this ink painting. On this night, Su Ming looked at the snow outside the window, and the image of Ugly Little Thing and her family during winter appeared in his head. Big brother, let's make a snowman, okay? Big brother, you're such a bully. You even broke the snowman. Big brother, why do you think there's snow? I asked Dad and Mom, but they don't know either. A smile appeared at the corners of Su Ming's lips. There were countless ghosts floating about in his room at that moment, causing his smile to look completely out of place. Su Ming was already used to these ghosts. In fact, he even noticed that the ghosts that came to his room every single night were different. They moved in and out of his room, and once most of Su Ming's divine sense recovered, he also saw that these ghosts were not just in his room. Besides a few spots in the entire outer sect, all the other places were occupied by ghosts. He looked at the snow outside the window, and after a long while, a freezing glare suddenly shone in his eyes. He let out a cold harumph in his heart and closed his eyes. Even though his eyes were shut, he could still sense his surroundings clearly with his divine sense. He saw the door to the house open without a single sound. When a gust of cold wind blew in, a person walked in. That person's entire body was surrounded by black fog, and his face could not be seen clearly. However, as he walked in, the ghosts in the room froze for a moment before they slowly dissipated and left the room. That person walked to Su Ming's bed and looked at him, who had his eyes closed as if he was sleeping. A dark light shone in the black fog. You little bastard, you ate so many of my medicinal cores. It's time for you to pay me back. That person was naturally Zhao Chong. He waved his arm, and a layer of black fog immediately swept up Su Ming. With a single move, it followed him out of the room and into his house. A chilling glare was hidden in Su Ming's closed eyes. Zhao Chong did not notice his divine sense at all. Su Ming watched the man sweep him into his room, then step into a rune hidden by the black fog in the room. As the light from the rune shone, Su Ming and Zhao Chong appeared in a dark mountain cave. Based on the ripples of power from the relocation, Su Ming could tell that they had not been relocated far away. They should still be within Evil Spirit Sect's territory. The area might be dark, but when Zhao Chong waved his hand, a dark light immediately shone on the area. This was a karst cave, and there were hundreds of dried-up corpses around it. All of them had their mouths wide open, and their eyes were lifeless. They were all skin and bones, as if they had lost all their flesh and life. Their appearances were different, but their actions were the same. They were all sitting cross-legged. Little bastard, you're about to meet your big brother. Zhao Chong was clearly still brooding over the medicinal cores Su Ming had eaten during the past half a year. Once he cursed him, he no longer bothered with Su Ming and instead sat down cross-legged on the ground. As he formed a seal with his hands, the fog around him immediately tumbled back into his body, revealing his face for the first time. It was a middle-aged man. His face was pale, and he looked incredibly weak. Once Su Ming saw his face with his divine sense, a thought formed in his heart. He looked incredibly similar to Ugly Little Thing's father. If it was not because their ages were different, they would have looked like father and son. 4 chapters and 11 chapters. I feel like I'm about to break after continuously releasing these explosive points. Don't blame me for missing 1,000 words in the last chapter, because even if I have to grit my teeth and persevere, I won't die of exhaustion. I'll continue releasing them tomorrow. For the first place, for the sake of widening the distance between us, I'll release them. Monthly votes. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 670. There are only 2 days left. As long as we persevere and maintain our lead, we will be victorious. In the last 2 days, Devil Army, don't take off your armor. It's not time yet. There are still 50 hours left. Fellow Taoists who have been paying attention in the last 2 days, can you lend us a helping hand? This month, we have fought for nearly 700 hours. In the last 50 hours, we must win. We cannot lose. Xiaoma is my spiritual sustenance. It is the majority of my life because I have given my life to her. Xiaoma is your home in Xiaoma. It is your country in Xiaoma. Now, in the face of this crisis in the last 50 hours, we must not rest until our ambitions are fulfilled. We must shed our blood and write the story of spring and autumn. We must drink to our heart's content on the morning of the 1st. This cup of wine is on me. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 671. Shendashi. When Su Ming saw Zhao Chong's face with his divine sense, the first thought that appeared in his mind was this person's identity. Su Ming might not have seen Ugly Little Thing's father, Chun Dashi, but he was certain that Zhao Chong's current body was that of Chun Dashi. So, it's a possession. Su Ming had his eyes closed, hiding the chilling glare hidden in them. He had originally made some guesses, but he had overlooked the possibility of possession because there was something that he could not explain. Zhao Chong's level of cultivation was equivalent to that of a berserker in the initial stage of the berserker soul realm. To the immortals, he would be a nascent soul realm cultivator. This sort of person would only choose to possess someone when their body was heavily injured. Furthermore, if he were to take over the body of a mortal, it would greatly affect his cultivation, so it was better not to take over the body. But Zhao Chong was different. Su Ming scanned the car's cave with his divine sense. There were plenty of dried-up corpses with the same expressions and actions around him, and a thought instantly appeared in Su Ming's mind. Could it be that it has something to do with my cultivation method? The people in the area were clearly Zhao Chong's disciples. Su Ming could already imagine that all of them had taken the medicinal core Zhao Chong had prepared for them every single day when they were under Zhao Chong's tutelage. Once they were almost done taking the medicinal cores, they would face Zhao Chong's killing intent, and then all of Zhao Chong's disciples would eventually turn into dried-up corpses in this place. Ugly Little Thing's brother was the last person who was possessed by Zhao Chong. Su Ming was the one who was about to take over. This Zhao Chong once said that I had to eat a medicinal core every single day for a year. But now, it's only been a little over 8 months, and he's already chosen to attack me. Judging by how flustered and exasperated he was just now, he seems to hold a great grudge against me. Su Ming laughed coldly in his heart. Naturally, he knew why Zhao Chong was acting this way. After all, during the past 8 months, Su Ming had practically caused Zhao Chong's heart to break down in pain, and he had even eaten up all of his savings. Besides, Zhao Chong did not want to give up on this. It was as if he had been trapped, and the moment Su Ming stretched out his hand, the medicinal cores would come to him. When Zhao Chong's pockets were empty, in his anger, he decided to attack beforehand. One could imagine Zhao Chong's grievance and depression over the past half a year. Su Ming was in no hurry to attack. He sized up Zhao Chong with his divine sense, and once he scanned the middle-aged man, he noticed something strange. If this person's body really did come from Chundashi, then Chundashi should be around 20 years old. But now this body looked middle-aged. It should be some sort of evil and poisonous cultivation method. Once I possess them, I can absorb their flesh and blood essence. Su Ming swept his divine sense through the dried-up corpses around him. He will also absorb the life force and soul of the possessed. Once he absorbs all of them, his body will turn into a mummy. This is no possession. This is clearly cannibalism. Su Ming focused his divine sense on Zhao Chong's body. At that moment, Zhao Chong's possessed body began to tremble violently. It gradually opened its mouth, and a green mist suddenly flew out. As the fog flew out, an indistinct figure gradually appeared before Su Ming. That figure was completely surrounded by fog, and as it tumbled about, Su Ming could vaguely tell that it was a nascent soul. A glint appeared in the nascent soul's eyes, and a fierce glare appeared as it glared at Su Ming. "You little bastard, I'd rather not absorb this Chondashi's flesh and blood essence just to devour you. Damn you for eating so many of my medicinal cores. I only obtained these medicinal cores after going through a lot of hardships, and every single one of them is the result of my blood, sweat, and tears. You sure ate them to your heart's content, but today you'll have to return to me several times the amount of what you ate in the past." Zhao Chong's anger had been building up for most of the year, and his resentment towards Su Ming was incredibly great. As he roared, his nascent soul charged forward and closed in on Su Ming. When it closed in, a ferocious smile appeared on the nascent soul's lips. He could already see himself pouncing on Su Ming, occupying his body, absorbing his flesh and blood essence, and devouring his soul. All the medicinal cores Su Ming had eaten over the past half a year would be nourished in his body before all of them were sucked away. Ever since he became a sect elder in evil spirit sect, he had taken in an innumerable amount of disciples, and none of them had managed to escape from his clutches. However, none of them had eaten as much as Su Ming did, and none of them had made his heart ache so much. In fact, the words that had nearly made him cough up blood would echo in his ears once a month during the past half a year. "Master, there's no more medicine left. Master, I'm done. Master, I'm done again. Can you give me more this time? Master, please change to another medicinal core. I don't feel anything from the one I ate just now. Master, can't you change to another one?" Zhao Chong shook his head and turned into a ray of dark light that charged towards the center of Su Ming's brows. He laughed ferociously, and his heart was filled with pleasure. This was the joy of being about to break free from the torment he had endured for half a year. During the past half a year, especially during the last few months, he had even felt as if he owed this person something in his previous life. Why did he take in such a weirdo? I'll let you eat more. Zhao Chong roared. The instant his nascent soul touched the center of Su Ming's brows, it rushed in. His ferocious laughter echoed in Su Ming's mind, and at the same time, Su Ming opened his eyes. His gaze was cold, and his expression was calm. In this world, the one thing Su Ming feared the least was possession. Unless the person who came to possess him had an undying will that surpassed the undying and imperishable world he had refined through the countless cycles of reincarnation, then all possession would be like throwing an egg against a stone before Su Ming. It was clear that this Zhao Chong did not possess this sort of will. The instant his nascent soul rushed into Su Ming's body, Su Ming lifted his right hand and tapped a few spots on his body. Every single time his finger fell, it would be as if a seal had been placed on his body. After a few taps, Su Ming's body turned into an impenetrable cage for Zhao Chong. However, Zhao Chong was completely unaware of this. He was still immersed in his pleasure as he rushed into Su Ming's body and charged towards his Dantian region. This was his habit. When he possessed each disciple, he would not devour their souls first. Instead, once he suppressed them, He would first absorb their flesh and blood essence to occupy their dantian region. Then, as if he was controlling his own body, he would slowly enjoy every single meal. Usually, he would need a year before he could finish eating a person. This process might be slow, but he enjoyed it. At that moment, he charged towards Su Ming's dantian region based on his habit. This little bastard has indeed eaten a lot over the past half a year. The color of his bones has changed, and even his flesh is different from other people's. I let you eat, and now they're all mine. It was a pity that before Zhao Chong reached the bone sacrifice realm, his body had been changed by the people from Evil Spirit Sect, and he was forced to practice evil arts. He might have formed his nascent soul, but his understanding towards Berserker bones was not complete. Besides, Su Ming's entire body was made up of Berserker bones, causing others to not feel any sense of comparison when they looked at him. If only his spine was like this, then Zhao Chong would have immediately understood what was going on. In his delight, Zhao Chong did not even know that Su Ming's body had already sealed off all his escape routes. He was still charging towards Su Ming's dantian region according to his habit, getting closer and closer. He could even imagine that Su Ming's dantian region would definitely be filled with sweetness. A large amount of essence would definitely have gathered there after being nourished by medicinal cores for the past half a year, and that place would definitely be empty, waiting for him, the only spirit body there, to devour it. In the past, every single time he went through something like this. Yet this time, Zhao Chong charged forward with his heart filled with hope, but when he arrived at Su Ming's dantian region, he was momentarily stunned, and his jaw dropped. In his eyes, Su Ming's dantian region did not contain the essence he had imagined it to contain after eating medicinal cores for the past half a year. Instead, there was a gigantic nascent soul that was several times bigger than him sitting cross-legged there. Perhaps this could no longer be called a nascent soul. This was Su Ming's nascent divinity. At that moment, Su Ming's nascent divinity had his eyes open and was looking at Zhao Chong's nascent soul calmly. After being momentarily stunned, Zhao Chong suddenly let out a shrill scream. A shudder ran through his body, and as he screamed, he quickly retreated, almost scared out of his wits. He had never expected that the disciple he originally thought was his prey would actually be an old monster. It was especially so when he looked at the nascent soul's appearance and the divine light circulating around it. This was clearly a nascent divinity. Soul formation. At the very least, he's still a soul formation. Damn it, how could this be? No wonder he could swallow so many medicinal cores. How could this be? He's definitely not Chunda, Shi's younger brother. At that moment, Zhao Chong's mind was in a mess. Terror filled his entire nascent soul, and his mind was blank. At that moment, the only thought in his mind was to rush out of Su Ming's body. In fact, he even had a feeling that he was walking right into a trap. When he remembered his smug actions just now, he felt as if he was about to cry. It was as if he had originally thought that Su Ming was a little sheep waiting for him to devour him. But the instant he opened his mouth and was about to swallow him in a smug manner, the little sheep immediately turned into an ancient ferocious beast that was several times stronger than him. Damn it, this old monster must be practicing a cultivation method that's similar to mine. He's going to devour me. The more Zhao Chong thought about it, the more he trembled. At the instant he was about to rush out of Su Ming's body, a bang rang out in his heart, and he was bounced back. To his shock, he discovered that Su Ming's body had turned into a cage, and he could not leave. In the midst of his fear, he heard a cold harumph echoing in his heart. Do you think my body is something you can come and go as you please? Su Ming's voice was cold. At the same time it traveled into Zhao Chong's heart. It made his trembling fear grow stronger. As he shivered, he knelt down and started kowtowing repeatedly. Senior, please spare me. Please spare me. I know my wrongs. I had eyes, but I failed to recognize you. I was truly wrong. As long as you don't kill me, I'm willing to serve you like a dog. Senior, please spare me. The first update is here. There are only 2 days left. The army of demons will charge. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 672. The instant Zhao Chong knelt down and begged for mercy, a burning power suddenly erupted from his body. This power instantly filled the surroundings, and his entire body suddenly began to dissipate. This was not a self-detonation. Instead, he had used the opportunity of begging for mercy to cause the other party to hesitate and unleash the most powerful devouring technique of the evil art. He wanted to forcefully occupy Zhao Chong's mind and destroy his soul. He knew that Zhao Chong's level of cultivation was higher than his, and he also knew that it would be difficult for him to be released unconditionally for his actions. But he still had some confidence that he could succeed. Almost the instant his nascent soul spread out, nearly 100 souls appeared in Su Ming's body. All of them were letting out shrill screams. These souls were all the disciples Zhao Chong had devoured over the years. Their souls had already fused together with his nascent soul. Once they spread out, it meant that Zhao Chong was not the only one trying to occupy Su Ming's mind. Nearly 100 souls were attacking him at the same time. This was the chance he believed himself to have. And this was the moment Su Ming had been waiting for. He had already guessed Zhao Chong's divine abilities and their uses, especially the dried-up corpses around the Karst cave. They were definitely not there just for Zhao Chong to look at. There was definitely something off about this. Once Su Ming analyzed it, he was certain that Zhao Chong's cultivation method was not just to absorb the essence of his disciples' flesh, blood, and souls, but also to use their souls to control their physical bodies and refine them into puppet-like existences. These puppets might not be powerful, but since Zhao Chong had done this, then he must have had a way to change them. If that was the case, then Chunda Shi's soul was definitely among them. Perhaps there was still a chance to save him. If that was not the case, Su Ming would have killed Zhao Chong a long time ago. There would have been no need for him to go through so much trouble. At that moment, Zhao Chong was forced to spread out all his souls and rush towards Su Ming's mind. At that moment, Su Ming's cold chuckle echoed within all the souls. Almost at the instant Zhao Chong rushed into Su Ming's mind with those souls and was about to forcefully assimilate Su Ming's will, a powerful will descended upon him. The strength of that will was like the might of the world, like an endless raging sea, and the souls in Zhao Chong were like ants in the world, like lone boats in the raging sea. Under Su Ming's will, the souls that had spread out from Zhao Chong's nascent soul dissipated one by one. They had been extracted for many years, and their lives were now connected to Zhao Chong's. However, there was one soul among them who disappeared from the list of those who died after being surrounded by a gentle ray of light. The scene that happened in Su Ming's mind did not cause too many waves, but the life and death in this place was the same as in the world outside. Su Ming's was the strongest force in this place. Under its suppression, all resistance crumbled, including Zhao Chong. He let out a shrill scream of pain and shattered, disappearing completely. Almost at the instant he died, wisps of incredibly pure power from a nascent soul appeared in Su Ming's mind. The purity of that power was something Zhao Chong had obtained after devouring it over the years. It was the source he had gathered in his nascent soul in preparation to reach the next realm. Yet at that moment, as he died, that power spread out into Su Ming's mind and was absorbed by his nascent divinity, causing his nascent divinity to recover rapidly at that instant. His nascent divinity had recovered to around half of its original state. Once he absorbed the power from Zhao Chong's nascent soul, that pure power and the aura of the world allowed Su Ming's nascent divinity to recover slightly. Even the berserker bones in his body also recovered slightly after absorbing Zhao Chong's life force. It caused Su Ming's cultivation base to recover from 5/10 to 6/10. Time trickled by without Su Ming's knowledge in the Karst cave. In the blink of an eye, several days went by. Su Ming sat cross-legged in the cave and meditated quietly. When dusk arrived outside, he opened his eyes. A brilliant light shone briefly in his eyes, and Su Ming let out a shaky breath. With a calm expression on his face, he cast a glance at his surroundings before his gaze fell on Shi, who was sitting not too far away from him. That physical body was still complete, but it was slightly thinner and did not have much life force. It was also soulless, like an empty shell. If Su Ming's arrival had not caused Zhao Chang's heart to ache over the loss of his medicinal cores and caused a deep resentment to rise within him, causing him to want to devour Su Ming beforehand, then in a few more months, she would have become the same as his senior brothers around him. However, Su Ming's appearance had caused Zhao Chang to change his plans. He could no longer care about absorbing Shi, which meant that it was not impossible for Shi to be revived. As Su Ming looked at Shi, ugly little thing's adorable smile appeared before his eyes. He lifted his right hand, and immediately, a ball of gentle light gradually spread out from his palm. Within that light, Su Ming could see a dazed soul. That soul's appearance was Shi's. This was Shi's soul. Before he destroyed Zhao Chang, Su Ming had found Shi among the many souls and used his own nascent divinity to contain his soul, which was why he did not die in Zhao Chang's hands. As he looked at this soul, Su Ming sighed in his heart. There was not much life force left in this soul, and it was the same for his physical body. Once he fused with it, even if Shi woke up, he would not be able to live for more than 10 years. Su Ming lifted his right hand and pushed forward. Immediately, the gentle light brought Shi's dazed soul into his body. Right at the instant it was about to fuse into his body, Shi's soul was no longer dazed. Instead, he became clear-headed. He turned around as if he wanted to cast a glance at Su Ming, but before he could see him clearly, he fused with his body. You were originally a dead person. All I can do is help you fight for 10 more years of life. Use these 10 years to accompany your parents, your little sister. Su Ming's voice echoed in the karst cave and fell into Shi's head. However, he was still unconscious at that moment. His soul was slowly fusing back with his body. Su Ming stood up and looked at the dried-up corpses around him. In silence, he swung his arm. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. You all died in Zhao Chang's hands, and your corpses are trapped here. I might not be a kind person, but I will still help you this once. As Su Ming spoke softly, a gust of wind appeared around him and blew outwards gently. Wherever the wind went, all the corpses would turn into ashes and fuse with the wind before they floated into the depths of the karst cave. Su Ming did not know whether it was a figment of his imagination, but when the corpses turned to dust, perhaps it was due to the changes in their bodies, but the emptiness on their faces seemed to show relief before they disappeared. Su Ming remained silent for a moment before he moved towards the depths of the karst cave, towards the place where the ashes were floating in the air. The karst cave was shaped like a gourd. When Su Ming arrived at the other end, he saw an old man dressed in black sitting there. That old man was thin and shriveled, and there was not a hint of life within him. He was already dead. The ashes of the flying corpses floated in the air, falling down layer by layer, as if they wanted to cover the old man. Perhaps the corpses that had existed for a long time contained some corrosive power, but even though they had turned into ashes, they still caused the old man's body to slowly start rotting. A deep wave of resentment spread out from the ashes of the corpses. Su Ming looked at it quietly. He could guess that the old man was Zhao Chang's real body. The souls of the disciples he killed might no longer be around, but the resentment they had before their deaths had caused them to want to corrode and kill their master before they disappeared. As Su Ming watched the corpses gradually rotting away until they eventually disappeared from his sight, he felt slightly sentimental in his heart. He turned around and left the place. Once he returned to his previous spot, Su Ming lifted his right hand and pointed at the unconscious Shi. Immediately, Shi's body flew towards Su Ming. Once Su Ming held him under his arm, he walked forward until he came to a rune on the ground not too far away. Su Ming lowered his head and cast a few glances at it before he stepped on it. The rune shone with a relocation light, and an instant later, that light disappeared, along with Su Ming and Shi, who were inside. The sky above Evil Spirit Mountain was not completely dark even after dusk had passed. Some indistinct shadows could still be seen on the ground. There was a faint light shining in the middle of the three houses in Zhao Chong's courtyard, and Su Ming walked out with Chunda, she under his arm. Once he walked out of the relocation room, Su Ming turned his head around and cast a glance at his surroundings. He remained silent for a moment, then took off the storage bag and some miscellaneous items from Chundashi's body. Black fog gradually spread out from his body, and, as it surrounded him, it caused his body to become indistinct. This Su Ming no longer looked any different from the previous Zhao Chong. During the instant he absorbed Zhao Chong's nascent soul, Su Ming had seen quite a lot of this person's memories. In those memories, he had learned that Zhao Chong was practicing an art called 10,000 Evil Phantom Dao. This art was incredibly vicious, but once he mastered it, its might would not be underestimated. However, for some unknown reason, it was difficult for anyone to master this art throughout the ages. Usually, they would die mysteriously when they were halfway through practicing it. It was also a coincidence that Zhao Chong had obtained this art. He was not the one who opened up the Kar's cave. It had always been there, and once he found it by accident, he also found the cultivation method for this evil art in there. From then on, he began practicing it in secret. This person might be a sect elder in evil spirit sect, but his status isn't high. Besides, he doesn't want to come into contact with other people after practicing this art. His death shouldn't attract too much attention. Su Ming originally had the thought of turning into Zhao Chong, but after a moment of pensive silence, he shook his head. He's a nascent soul cultivator whose power is equivalent to a berserker in the initial stage of the berserker soul realm. Even if he's a berserker who switched to practicing evil arts, even if his death doesn't attract too much attention, someone will still come to investigate. Su Ming's right hand shone and touched Chundashi's body. Immediately, Chundashi's body disappeared, but Su Ming was still holding Zhao Chong's storage bag and miscellaneous items in his hand. After a moment of pensive silence, he turned around and stepped into the rune once again. The second one was delivered to him. Jin continued persevering. It was difficult to get first place, but was it not difficult to be a human? Was life not difficult? The more difficult it was, the more we had to struggle, the more we had to fight back. I beg for monthly votes. To be continued. If you like this work, please come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 673. After a moment, Su Ming walked out and crouched down. As his eyes sparkled, he made some arrangements on the relocation rune. Using the memories Hong Luo had inherited regarding the structure of the relocation rune, he wiped off all traces on it, then left the house expressionlessly. After a moment of pensive silence, a freezing glare shone in his eyes, and with one move, he left the courtyard. At that moment, he had already recovered 6/10 of his cultivation base, and he could now do many things that he could not previously do, be it the weakness he had left behind at the mountain gate or the hesitation in Zhang and Zhu's hearts. Before long, Su Ming returned with a calm expression on his face. He went back to his room, lay down on his bed, closed his eyes, and pretended to sleep. Almost at the same time Zhao Chong died, there was a towering hall at the top of Evil Spirit Mountain that belonged to the inner sect. That hall was also dark and filled with a ghastly air. Two old men were sitting cross-legged in the hall. Their faces were gray, and they looked sickly. They did not move, and even the rise and fall of their chests could not be seen when they breathed. Behind them was a gigantic statue. That statue was incredibly huge, and it was of a man dressed in a phantom robe. He looked to be middle-aged, and there were countless ferocious ghost faces on his robes. He was standing on a gigantic python that was hissing, and most of its body was wrapped around the man's body. In the man's right hand was a shield, and there were countless vengeful spirits stretching out from it. Each of these spirits' faces were incredibly clear, and they exuded a forlorn air. A sinister feeling lingered around the statue. Above the statue's head was a black lotus platform. Sitting cross-legged on the lotus platform was a woman. That woman had a solemn expression on her face. She was extremely beautiful and gave off a pure and holy feeling. Holy and sinister. These two completely different feelings were mixed together on the statue, causing all those who saw it for the first time to be filled with a strange feeling. There were quite a few bells hanging on the body of the python under the man's feet. When there was no wind, they would not make the slightest sound, but at this moment, when Zhao Chong died, one of the many bells began to move even though there was no wind and gave off a clear ringing sound. That chime was incredibly sudden, and it was incredibly clear in the silent hall. As it rang out, the bell gradually shattered with a crack and fell to the ground. At that moment, the two old men, sitting there unmoving like four people, slowly opened their eyes. Their eyes were calm as they looked at the shattered bell on the ground. This origin bell is half black. It belongs to a berserker who has switched to practicing evil arts. One of the old men said in a hoarse voice after casting a glance. As his voice echoed in the silent hall, the originally rather dim hall was immediately lit up by dark flames, causing the place to change between light and darkness as they swayed. The other old man closed his eyes slightly, and after a moment he said languidly, "Outer Sect Elder, Zhao Chong's origin bell, Zhao Chong. The person who was secretly guided by the sect to practice 10,000 evil ghost Tao, huh? I remember that he took in another disciple a few months ago. Go and investigate it. A nascent soul cultivator died in the sect. We have to give an explanation." The two old men did not seem to be in sync with each other when they spoke. It was as if they were not answering each other's questions. It was as if their last few sentences were not even a conversation. Once the two of them finished speaking, two indistinct figures appeared out of nowhere in the hall behind the two old men. Once they bowed towards them, they turned around and left the hall. After the two blurry shadows left, the dim light in the hall dimmed. When it was extinguished, the hall was once again plunged into silence and darkness. There were no longer any ringing of the bells, and the two old men closed their eyes. At the instant Su Ming returned to his room and lay down on his bed, a faint, brilliant light shone faintly in his narrowed eyes. He might have recovered 6/10 of his cultivation base, but it would be best if he did not expose himself. This place was incredibly suitable for him to recover his cultivation base. Su Ming also had an even greater goal in mind. If he could recover to the peak of his cultivation base, then he would use the thick power of the world in this place to reach Berserker Soul Realm. If not for this place, it would be incredibly difficult for him to find another place with such power of the world. He had never tried to reach Berserker Soul Realm before, but he had heard his master mention it a few times when he was in the 9th Summit. When a Berserker tried to reach Berserker Soul Realm, he had to search for a sufficient amount of aura to support him, or else there was a high possibility that he would give up halfway. Su Ming knew that it would be incredibly difficult for him to reach Berserker Soul Realm. After all, his entire body was made of Berserker bones. If that was the case, then he would need a sufficient amount of power of the world to absorb, and this place was the most suitable place for him. That was why, unless it was absolutely necessary, he did not want to reveal his identity. At that moment, the brilliant light in his eyes disappeared. His divine sense had sensed that two people had appeared in the courtyard outside his room. These two people's levels of cultivation were slightly higher than Zhao Chong's. They might not have reached the middle stage of the Berserker Soul Realm, but they were infinitely close to it. The number of powerful berserkers in Eastern Wastelands is indeed much greater than in South Morning, especially when the Immortals descended. It caused the number of powerful berserkers in Eastern Wastelands to far surpass that of South Morning. Without batting an eyelid, Su Ming closed his eyes and fell into deep sleep. His spiritual sense sensed the two figures appear in the courtyard, and they immediately headed for Zhao Chong's house, passing through the door and stepping into Zhao Chong's room. When Su Ming saw this, he laughed coldly in his heart. The second time he went to the Karst Cave, he had done so to prepare for everything that was about to happen. With his divine sense, he noticed that the two people had disappeared from Zhao Chong's house. Clearly, they had been relocated to the Karst Cave. After about the time it takes for an incense stick to burn, the two people appeared once again. This time, They did not immediately leave once they came out of Zhao Chong's house. Instead, they charged towards Su Ming's room. Su Ming closed his eyes and pretended to sleep. His breathing was even, as if he did not know what was going on. However, he had his divine sense spread outward slightly. If there was any sign of movement, he would make his judgment and choose whether or not to attack. The two people went through Su Ming's room and floated towards him. One of them let out a cold sneer, lifted his right hand, and charged straight towards Su Ming's neck. The other person's eyes sparkled as he stared at Su Ming, observing his every move. All of this might have seemed to have happened over a long period of time, but in truth, only an instant had passed since the two people stepped into Su Ming's room. The other person's finger was about to touch Su Ming's neck. Su Ming shuddered, as if he had been frozen by the sudden appearance of a freezing chill in his sleep. When he turned his head around, he looked as if he was about to open his eyes. It did not matter whether it was his expression or his expression. They were incredibly real, as if he really was a 12 or 13-year-old boy. However, killing intent was hidden deep within his heart. If these two people were just testing him, then he would not mind, but if they wanted to kill him, then Su Ming might have to attack. Yet right at the instant he opened his eyes, the person's index finger froze, and when Su Ming opened his eyes, his body disappeared along with the other person. A glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes. He no longer bothered himself with it, and closed his eyes to continue pretending to sleep. Before long, the two shadows who had been testing Su Ming just now gradually appeared behind the two old men in the silent and dark hall located at the top of the mountain in evil spirit sect's intersect. However, they had fused with the darkness, causing others to be unable to see them clearly. All the dried-up corpses of the disciples Zhao Chong absorbed in the karst cave have turned into ashes and buried his real body. His storage bag is still there, and all the miscellaneous items are still there. There are no other presences in the karst cave, and there are no signs of battle or battle. Based on the state of the relocation rune, it was only activated once before we went there. There were people who went in, but no one came out. We've also investigated the disciple Zhao Chong took in 8 months ago. That boy is just a mortal, and he's a loner. He hasn't shown any signs of going out over the past 8 months, but his life force is incredibly strong. We've asked the disciples who brought him up the mountain. Both of them spoke normally, and they didn't find anything suspicious about the boy. We've investigated the sacred python in the outer sect. It doesn't have a deep impression of the boy. We've also investigated the unusual movements of the vengeful spirits on the mountain stairs when the boy came up the mountain 8 months ago. We've investigated it and found that it was because Shan Hen was carrying out the mission of feeding vengeful spirits that day. The two people spoke one after another. Their voices were incredibly calm, and there was not a single hint of their own judgment in their words. They only spoke of what they had found out. As for how they were going to make a judgment, that was not something they should do. The hall was silent. After a long while, an old voice spoke. It's normal for him to have a strong life force. Zhao Chong must have fed this boy a lot of soul-nurturing pills. The mummy turned into ashes and buried Zhao Chong's body. Looks like all those who practice evil ghosts 10,000 souls Dao will have to endure the karmic fire in the end. This shouldn't have anything to do with the boy. Send him to Conscience Censure Hall to be questioned. If there's nothing wrong with him, then ignore him. If there's nothing wrong with this boy, he can't stay in the outer sect either. Send him to the laborers' quarters at the foot of the mountain, and this matter will end here. The old voice in the hall ended the series of events brought about by Zhao Chong's death, and the hall slowly fell silent once again. On the second morning, Su Ming was summoned by an expressionless outer sect disciple and brought to a gap in evil spirit sect that was near the inner sect. There was a 2-story building there. Once he left Su Ming there, the outer sect disciple turned around and left. Come in. A woman's aloof voice traveled into Su Ming's ears from the 2-story building. The third update is here, and there's still a fourth update. I've said it before, the updates this month are unprecedented. I beg for monthly votes. To be continued. If you like this work, please come Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 674. The power of the world in this place was incredibly thick, much thicker than in other places. It was as if a large amount of the aura in the mountain had been intentionally swept into this place. Because of that, the feeling in this place was completely different from the other places. The instant that voice fell into Su Ming's ears, it turned into an indescribable warmth that filled his entire body, causing a dazed expression to appear on his face. As if he had lost his soul, he walked forward in a daze and pushed open the door to the two-story building. He walked in, and there was a statue before him. That statue was not big. It was of a woman sitting on a black lotus platform. She had long hair and was incredibly beautiful. Her eyes were closed, and a holy presence came crashing into his face, causing all the grudge in the mountain to completely disappear, not daring to come to this place. However, the power of the world was centered around the statue. Because of that, the statue was a vortex that continuously attracted the power of the world to come to this place and make it linger and spin around the place. Su Ming stared at the statue blankly. There was a dazed expression on his face, and his eyes were empty. "Sit down." The gentle woman's voice traveled into his ears once again. Su Ming sat down slowly like a puppet. His dazed expression fused with his age, causing all those who saw him to let down their guard. "What happened last night?" The gentle voice echoed in Su Ming's ears. That voice gave him an incredibly cordial feeling, as if it was mumbling in his dreams. He seemed to have lost all resistance, and he started mumbling along with that voice. He had no idea how much time had passed, but as Su Ming answered in a daze, a person appeared behind him. It was an old woman. Her face was filled with wrinkles, and she looked incredibly ugly, but the gentle voice had come from her mouth. She looked at Su Ming. The aloof look in her eyes and the gentle voice were incredibly distinct, as if they were two different people. "Think about it. Is there anything else you've forgotten that you haven't told me?" She spoke gently and lifted her right hand to pluck out a strand of white hair. She placed it on Su Ming's head and allowed it to fall down. Once it landed on the top of his skull, it gradually fused into his body and disappeared without a trace. Su Ming mumbled under his breath and answered all the questions she asked. It was as if he had forgotten about the flow of time. When the gentle voice that made him feel so familiar to him told him that he could leave, he stood up in a daze and walked out of the tower. When he walked far into the distance and returned to his house, the dazed look in Su Ming's eyes disappeared and was replaced by a cold look. Bewitching art. A glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes. He lifted his right hand and pressed it against the top of his head. Immediately, a strand of white hair fell from the top of his head, and he held it in his hand. As he stared at that strand of hair, a smile suddenly appeared on Su Ming's lips. The old woman's place is pretty good. The density of the power of the world, there is actually several times greater than this place. There might not be many places in Evil Spirit's sect whose spiritual aura can surpass that of this place. This is the best place for me to heal and reach Berserker's soul realm. Su Ming's eyes sparkled as he stared at the white strand of hair in his hand. That strand of hair was left behind by the woman to continue observing him. However, now that it was in Su Ming's hands, he could turn it around and use it to control the old woman. There's no hurry. Su Ming cast a glance at that strand of hair, then used it as a rope and tied a knot. At the instant he did so, the power of the old woman, sitting and meditating in the two-story building some distance away, started fluctuating for a moment. She suddenly opened her eyes and frowned. She examined her body carefully, but she did not find anything wrong with it. In silence, she closed her eyes once again. She had already handed over the jade slip regarding what Su Ming had said to the punishment hall. This matter no longer had anything to do with her. Su Ming remained quiet for 3 days before he sighed and left the house he had stayed in for 8-something months. Once Zhao Chong died and an order from the outer sect came, he was chased out of the outer sect and chased to the foot of Evil Spirit Mountain. That was the place where the laborers and disciples who did not have the right to enter the outer sect stayed. The ones who brought him, there were still Zhang and Zhua. These two people had completely lost their memories of Su Ming. At that moment, they had impatient looks on their faces. Once they brought Su Ming to the hall in charge of the foot of the mountain, they left in a hurry without even going in. In the hall in charge of the foot of the mountain was a thin, middle-aged man with a slightly protruding mouth and cheeks like that of a monkey. He was continuously sizing up Su Ming. He had been here for many years, and it was not as if he had never run into any disciples who had been sent down from the outer sect. However, half of these people would return before long. Because of that, he did not want to immediately offend Su Ming, even though there was only a 50-50 chance of that happening. Of course, if there was still no news after a year or so, then he would naturally change his attitude. At that moment, there was a smile on his face as he wrapped his fist in his palm towards Su Ming. I am Qian Shun. Junior brother, you must be Qin Su, right? Junior brother Chun, don't be dejected. Just treat this as coming here to relax. I believe that before long, you'll return. How about this, junior brother Chun? Do you want me to give you a position to manage the maidservants or to manage the purchases outside? Or to be an attendant who distributes spirit stones? As long as junior brother Chen asks for any position, I will definitely agree to it. Chun patted his chest. When he mentioned the position of managing the maidservants, he even gave Su Ming a smile that said, you know what I mean. Managing the maidservants is an art. You have to learn a lot about how to make them listen to you. There are plenty of times when you need to set an example for yourself, junior brother Chen. Only when you think that you're good will you be good, right? This is a very important position. It's a position that requires people who are willing to contribute selflessly. I think junior brother Chun is worthy of this position. Also, only a person who is willing to do the purchases outside will be able to do it. There are many people in the mountain, and they have to eat, drink, poop, and do other things. All of these things are like mountains on their shoulders. To ensure that their lives are safe, the person in this position must have a fearless spirit. Then, no matter how expensive it is, he must buy it. Also, senior brother Chun is currently in charge of distributing spirit stones. This job is even more difficult. Junior brother, you shouldn't be too interested in it. As Qian Shin spoke, he watched Su Ming's expression. He was the most worried about this person, who he could not figure out for the time being, asking for the position of distributing spirit stones. That was why he had set it to see whether Su Ming would be tactful. At that moment, his beady eyes were sparkling, but the smile on his face remained the same. This was a person who bullied the weak and feared the strong. He was a sly person, but once he turned against someone, he would turn his back on them. Su Ming cast Qian a glance. With his experience, he could already tell most of this person's personality from the moment he came into contact with him. Junior brother Chun, there have been a few more women who have been brought up the mountain recently. They're going to search for the serendipity of immortals. I heard that one of them, Ahem, is really good. You know, why don't I take you to see her? Chapter 4. I have something to say. It's in a single chapter. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 675. Brothers, sisters. There are 7 days at the end of the month. Apart from the 3 chapters in the middle, there are 6 days of 4 chapters. Can such an outburst really not beat 10 chapters? But I can't finish 10 chapters. I can only write 1,500 words an hour at most. That's my limit, and I can't keep up with this speed. I want to be faster, but I can't be faster. I'm anxious. I've thought about not caring about the quality and just write as much as I can. I've written before, but you don't know that when I read it myself after I finished writing, I couldn't read it, so I deleted it. I've always wanted to ask, has the online novel industry really reached an era where we have to compete with others in terms of quantity and not ourselves? Has it really reached such a time? Everyone's speed is different. Everyone's writing style is different. Every novel's rhythm is different. Writing habits are different. Brothers, sisters. How can we compete? Let me give you an example. It doesn't involve any author. It's just an example. One person writes 2,500 words an hour. Another writes 1,000 words an hour. Another writes 500 words an hour. They wrote for 10 hours together. Everyone is very tired. They wrote seriously. The first person wrote 25,000 words. The second person wrote 10,000 words. The third person wrote 5,000 words. Can you say that the second and third person didn't work hard? Can you say that they didn't explode? From what I know, in the online literature circle, the fastest person can write 810,000 words in an hour. The slowest one is indeed only 500 words. How can we compete? How can we compete? What is a novel? It's to entertain the public. But at the same time, it's also something that I can read with gusto when I'm old. That's my dream. I hope that years later, when I read my own book, I'll clap my hands and shout that my writing was damn good. I hope that's the case. That's my dream. I don't know about others, but according to Chiomo, I can guarantee that my quality is 100% at 2 chapters. At 3 chapters, it's 90%. At 4 chapters, it's 70%. So on and so forth. It doesn't involve others. This is Chiomo. I'm very conflicted. I don't want to explode. It's not because I'm tired. I'm afraid I'll regret it in the future. I'll be unwilling to look back. This month is about to end. I'll fight to the end in this conflict. Monthly votes. To be continued. If you like this work, please come Achidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 676. The sky was bright and sunny, except for the black smoke at the top of Evil Spirit Mountain. The sky beyond the black smoke was clear. Because of that, it made the black smoke incredibly eye-catching, and it also made all those who lifted their heads to look at it see that the sky was extraordinarily blue. There were also some white clouds floating in the sky, and under the bright sunlight, it made all those who saw it unable to help themselves but feel lazy. If it was not winter, then perhaps the sky would have been even more perfect. Su Ming lifted his head and looked at the sky. Qian Shen's slightly lascivious words were still echoing in his ears. He had never experienced this sort of feeling in his life. It did not matter whether it was the memories he had in Dark Mountain, the Ninth Summit, or even the years he had spent in the land of the shamans. He had never entered a sect like this. If he was not a direct disciple, no one paid too much attention to him. He was chased out of the outer sect, as if he had been banished to the office of laborers. As he looked at Qian Shun, who was smiling at him with a lascivious look on his face, a smile gradually appeared on Su Ming's face. He suddenly had a feeling that he liked this sort of feeling. He did not need to think too much to know that this person was being so friendly, because he could not figure out his origins. After all, on the surface, Su Ming looked like someone who had descended from the outer sect. He might have looked as if he was being chased away, but this was how evil spirit sect usually treated disciples who committed crimes. Because of that, there was a possibility that he would be summoned back. If that was the case, then it was no wonder why this Qian Shen was being so friendly. When Su Ming thought of this, he looked at Qian Shen with a smile and shook his head. Without a hint of hesitation, Qian Shen's expression immediately turned stern. That stern expression exuded a dignified air, and at the same time, it was also filled with respect and admiration. Qian Shen cast Su Ming a profound look before he nodded slowly. As expected of an outer sect disciple, Junior Brother Chun, I originally wanted to use this to test you and see what your temperament is like. If you agreed to become a servant girl, then there would be plenty of beautiful girls listening to your orders every single day and obeying your orders as if they were the might of heaven itself. Then, I would look down on you. As cultivators, how can we waste our temperament for women? This is something we absolutely cannot do. In fact, even if you really agreed, I would advise you not to do so. Because we are fellow disciples, and because I am your senior brother, I have the obligation to tell you that this is not something we should do. Junior Brother Chun, I've always been selfless. Otherwise, the sect wouldn't have given me the heavy responsibility of doing odd jobs. And you, out of all the people I've met, you're the most valiant person, the one I admire the most. Qian spoke slowly. After he finished speaking, his expression matched his words, revealing the expression he should have. It was as if he had been considering all of this, as if he was truly testing Su Ming. Then junior brother Chun, please be in charge of going out and buying things. This is an incredibly important matter. As Qian Chen spoke, he saw Su Ming frown when he heard his words. A thought immediately appeared in his head, and his tone changed swiftly. This is incredibly important. That's impossible. His expression turned into one of righteousness as he looked at Su Ming sternly. Because this is only relatively speaking. If it was anyone else, this might be a good task, but to junior brother Chun, this is a dirty task that you absolutely cannot touch. Going out and buying things is an insult to people like you who are immersed in training. This is harming you, and it's wasting your training time. What is time? Junior brother Chun, time is life. I agree with this saying the most. Don't worry, I will definitely not waste your life. In truth, you don't know this, but this is also a test for me. Junior brother Chun, my admiration for you has already surpassed everything else. I am proud that Evil Spirit Sect has a genius like you. Qian Chen's voice was like a torrential river that flowed endlessly. Right from the start, Su Ming did not say a single word. All he heard was Qian Chen's voice echoing in his ears. As Qian Chen spoke, he kept an eye on the changes in Su Ming's expression, and he gradually became nervous. He realized that he could not quite figure out this boy's thoughts. After all, he had seen some of the disciples who had been punished in the outer sect before, but he had always been able to see through some of their thoughts with just a few words. From that, he could tell how important they were in the outer sect, and he could also tell whether they had any sort of background. He could also tell whether they could be used by him. And from there, he could differentiate their ranks in his heart. He often lamented about how difficult his job was. He had to observe the people's words and expressions, and he had to figure out who he wanted to suppress, who he wanted to flatter, who he wanted to be aloof, and who he wanted to be friendly to. This was the most important thing to him. However, Chun Su was someone Qian Chen could not figure out. Right from the start, he had not said a single word, and his calm expression made him look like a person who had not been chased out of the outer sect. It was as if he was just a child of a rich family who would occasionally go on an outing after coming to this place. This attitude made Qian Chen's heart let out a loud thump. He's definitely a powerful warrior. This person is definitely a powerful person. It's not that his level of cultivation is high. It's that he has a powerful background, or else with his age, there's no way he would be able to remain so calm. Qian Chen immediately came to this conclusion. The most troublesome thing is running into people like this. This person is ranked 3rd on the Do Not Provoke ranking I've come up with over the past 20 years I've been working in this laborer's office. Qian Chen had a smile on his face, but he was incredibly wary in his heart. He had run into people who had been chased out of the outer sect and came here. Some of them were arrogant, and he could easily deal with them. He had also run into people who liked to put on airs and were filled with murderous auras. He had even run into people who had smiles on their faces but had sinister looks in their eyes. He had run into far too many people of all sorts during the past 20 years. If he were to use one of his famous words to describe how he treated these disciples who had been chased out of the outer sect, it would be, "Darn it, even a dragon would have to coil up before your grandpa Qian, and even a tiger would have to crouch before your grandpa Qian. Something's not right. Something's really not right. There's something wrong with this Chen Su, something big." Qian Chun bent his back slightly, and an incredibly brilliant smile appeared on his face. "I know that the job that suits you the most is the job of distributing spirit stones. Don't worry, junior brother Chun. To allow you to develop better, and for Evil Spirit Sect to become stronger, I will make a selfless contribution and hand over the job of distributing spirit stones to you. I know that you definitely don't like this job, junior brother Chun, but today I realize that you're much more suitable for this job than I am. Please don't reject it. This concerns the future of Evil Spirit Sect, the structure of Eastern Wastelands, and the fates of millions of people." Qian Chen's face was filled with compassion, and his voice was filled with emotion. There was a slight quiver in his voice, as if he had turned into the master of Eastern Wastelands at that moment and was handing it over to Su Ming. Even Su Ming was momentarily stunned by Qian Chen's words. If it was not because he was absolutely certain that this Qian Shan before him was not hiding anything or changing himself, he would have thought that this person was the bald crane. In Su Ming's eyes, only the bald crane could compare to him in terms of eloquence. As for who would win, Su Ming was more inclined towards the bald crane. After all, they were at different levels. Find me a quiet and secluded place. I want to isolate myself. Su Ming cast Qian a glance and spoke for the first time. His voice was flat, but there was a tone within it that allowed no argument. Qian's heart let out a loud thump once again. He took 2 steps back and scrutinized Su Ming from head to toe. Rank increased. This person is no longer ranked 3rd on the Do Not Provoke rank, but 2nd. He was feeling slightly nervous in his heart, but not a single hint of it showed on his face. He still had that brilliant smile on his face, and when he heard Qian's words, he nodded in a gratified manner. Not bad. Junior Brother Chun, I did not misjudge you. I respect you. I respect you. As he spoke, he even gave Su Ming a thumbs up. The gratification on his face was not fake, and there was even a hint of sincerity on his respectful expression. He no longer wasted his breath. He patted his body with his right hand and immediately brought out a jade slip, which he handed to Su Ming. Junior Brother Chun, I respect you. I won't say anything else, but you can choose any of the places with glowing spots here. You don't need to do anything. You just need to focus on your training. Junior Brother Chun, I will support you with all my strength. If anyone from the higher-ups comes to investigate, then I, Qian Shun, will shoulder all responsibility for you. I'm just that straightforward. I'm just that upright. I'm a person who likes to think about others, and I won't care about my own gains and losses. Once we spend more time together in the future, Junior Brother Chun, you'll realize this. Su Ming's divine sense was a little strange. He took the jade slip and scanned it with his divine sense. Immediately, a map of the foot of the mountain appeared in his head, and there were plenty of glowing spots shining on it. Qian looked at Su Ming carefully, and a barely noticeable glint appeared in his eyes. He felt slightly smug in his heart. If you choose a place close to the outer sect, it means that the possibility of you returning to the outer sect is very high. If you choose the middle position, it means that you're also hesitating in your heart. If you choose the lowest position, it means that you're also confused about the future. Although this method is not completely accurate, it can still explain some problems. Once Su Ming scanned the map on the jade slip with his divine sense, he remembered the 2-story building near the top of the mountain. After a moment, he chose a spot near the outer sect. That was the place closest to the 2-story building. Once he made his choice, Su Ming returned the jade slip to Qian. Once Qian received it with a smile, he focused his gaze on it, and immediately, a slightly unnatural expression appeared on his face, but it soon returned to normal. However, when he looked at Su Ming, there was a faint sparkle in his eyes. There's no way I'm wrong. This person has a great background and will leave in a month at most. Such a person must be served well. Although he's not in the 1st tier, he's definitely one of the best in the 2nd tier. Sigh. It's a pity that I've been here for 20 years, but I've never met anyone who's ranked 1st on the Do Not Provoke list. It's better not to meet him. The first update is here. Today, continue to persevere and erupt. To be continued. If you like this work, please come Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 677. The place Su Ming chose might be close to the outer sect, but it was at the back of the mountain and was rather secluded. Not many people would come to this place, usually. It was a simple house, and it was surrounded by weeds. Clearly, no one had tidied it up for a long time. The power of the world in this place was not thick, and it could not compare to the courtyard Su Ming had stayed in the outer sect. It could not compare to the 2-story building that had tempted Su Ming greatly. However, this place was quiet, and it was relatively close to the 2-story building. In fact, if Su Ming stood outside the house and lifted his head, he would be able to see the indistinct shadow of the 2-story building at the top of the mountain. Su Ming looked around him. He was rather satisfied with this place. Chien-shun had originally wanted to have someone clean up the weeds around him, but Su Ming had stopped him. It was better for the place to be left as it was. Because of that, it would make it much more secluded. When the sun set, Chien-shun continued following behind Su Ming with a brilliant smile on his face. It could be said that he had been asking about Su Ming's well-being and had even asked whether he needed any servants. Once Su Ming rejected him, he continued smiling, and only when dusk fell did he wrap his fist in his palm and leave when Su Ming showed signs of fatigue. Chien had left with his thoughts in his mind for the time being. When dusk ended and the sky gradually darkened, Su Ming was not in his room. Instead, he was outside, leaning against the wall of the house. He sat there and looked at the sky. It was winter at that moment. The weeds around him were covered in white snow. In fact, there were even a few snowflakes falling from the sky after dusk. One of them fell right before Su Ming's eyes, and he lifted his hand to catch it. His palm felt cold, and he watched as the snowflake melted on his palm. If snowflakes appear to melt on the ground, then is this the fate of snowflakes? Su Ming had recovered nearly 6/10 of his cultivation base, but there was still a long way to go before he could completely recover. Based on his estimations, unless he was in the 2-story building, then even if he was in the courtyard in the outer sect, he would need at least 10 years before he could recover to his peak. After all, the recovery of his cultivation base would be very quick in the beginning, but the further he progressed, the harder it would be for him to continue. The recovery speed of the last 4/10 of his cultivation base could not be compared to the first 6/10. I must go to the 2-story building. A glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes. When he opened his palm, a strand of white hair appeared on his palm. There was a knot on that strand of hair, and Su Ming placed his right hand on that knot. He closed his eyes slightly and started sensing it quietly based on the words of Ugly Little Thing's father. Time passed slowly, and soon it was already deep into the night. More snow fell from the sky, and as they drifted down, not only was the path ahead covered in darkness, but it was also cut into pieces by the snowflakes. Su Ming continued leaning against the house as he sat outside. He was still holding the white strand of hair in his hand. There was a faint fragrance coming from it, and when Su Ming touched it in the middle of the night, he felt as if he could smell that fragrance. The night passed uneventfully. Su Ming sat there for the entire night, immersed in the feeling Ugly Little Thing's father spoke of, searching for the essence of this grass rope record. What Su Ming wanted was not a curse or a blessing, but a form of control over the old woman's mind. He wanted to increase the number of knots on the strand of hair, and eventually, he would weave them into a doll. Then, with the doll's power, he would control the old woman's mind. This sort of control over the old woman's mind would turn her into a puppet-like existence. Because of it, Su Ming would be able to enter the 2nd floor without anyone noticing and train for a long period of time. He had also considered using his power to attack, but no matter what, his cultivation base had not completely recovered. There were many things that could not change, and he was also prepared to reach the Berserker Soul realm in the building. He needed someone to protect him. If he could control the old woman, then he would be able to kill many birds with one stone. When morning arrived, Su Ming's eyes flew open. A hint of understanding appeared in his eyes, and without any hesitation, he tied another knot on that strand of hair. At that moment, 2 knots appeared on that white strand of hair. At the instant the 2nd knot appeared, the old woman who was meditating on the 2nd floor shuddered. Her eyes flew open, and shock and bewilderment appeared on her face. She spread her divine sense outwards and surrounded the area with an incredibly grave expression on her face. However, no matter how she investigated the area, she could not find any clues. It was as if nothing had happened, but she had felt a chill during that instant just now, as if someone had stabbed her with a needle. It was not painful, but she felt as if she had been stabbed in the soul. The old woman frowned and carefully thought about it for a long time. She even checked her body inside and out, but she didn't find anything wrong. This made her hesitate, but she gradually remembered this matter in her heart. Winter seemed to last for a very long time. During the past month, snow would occasionally fall, and each time it fell, it would become heavier than the last. At that moment, the snow that filled the sky looked as if a gigantic hole had appeared in the sky. The sky was crying, but when its tears fell, it seemed as if it did not want anyone to see them, which was why it turned them into snow. The snow might seem gentle and soft. However, once it accumulated to a certain degree, it could crush mountains, freeze all manner of things, and destroy all lives. Snow fell from the sky and covered the sky and earth, covering the area outside Su Ming's house. Even the spot where he was meditating was covered in a thick layer of snow. Su Ming continued holding that white strand of hair in his hand. During the past month, he had not restored his cultivation base, but had instead immersed himself in his epiphany and keeping records with the grass rope. By then, there were already 6 knots on that strand of hair. Su Ming did not leave too much of his will on those 6 knots. He had only left his epiphany on them. When he touched them with his hand, it was as if he was touching his own thoughts. Qian Shun would occasionally come over during the past month. His attentive manner made it seem as if Su Ming was his senior brother, and he was just a junior brother or a junior. On this day, he came over once again in the snow. Behind him were dozens of laborers with respectful expressions on their faces. Under Qian Shen's orders, these laborers immediately started clearing the snow. Su Ming closed his eyes and did not bother too much with them. If Qian Chun continued being so tactful, then perhaps he would give him a serendipity in the future. The path was under his feet, and it would depend on how this person would understand it and walk down it. On the 3rd day after Su Ming came to this place for a month, hesitation appeared on his face. He looked at the white strand of hair in his hand. There were still 6 knots on it. He should have tied the 7th knot now, but he did not have the confidence to do so. In silence, he stared at the strand of hair. During the past month, he had been immersed in his epiphany, and his understanding towards the grass knot record-keeping art had become much better than before. The first 6 knots were tied based on Su Ming's epiphany, but now he had a vague feeling that he needed to add his will to the 7th knot. Once his will was added, the 7th knot would become a key. If he failed, then the strand of hair would turn into ashes. But if he succeeded, then with his will, it would mean that Su Ming had taken the first step toward success. There's only 1 strand of hair. If I don't succeed, then I'll have to make more preparations. Su Ming's eyes sparkled, and he swiftly moved his hands to tie the 7th knot on the white strand of hair. At the same time he did so, a shudder ran through Su Ming's body, and he forced a voice to echo in his head. I am your master. All my will is your will. All my words must be obeyed. That voice continued echoing in Su Ming's head, turning into his will, and as if he was writing, he wrote it on the knot on the strand of hair. However, fusing his will into the strand of hair was not an easy task for Su Ming. After all, he had just come into contact with grass, not records. He was not like Ugly Little Thing's father, who had naturally come into contact with the quintessence of the art due to his talent. More importantly, since Ugly Little Thing's father was a mortal, the dolls he made were also meant for mortals. That was why he did not have to spend too much energy and bear the burden. He would only feel incredibly tired after making a few dolls. However, it was different for Su Ming. The white strand of hair belonged to the old woman, and she had extraordinary power. If he wanted to use this art to control a powerful warrior, then the burden he would have to bear would naturally be much greater. Even Su Ming was trembling, and 2 streams of blood gradually fell from the corners of his eyes. It was the same for his ears. In that instant, he stopped breathing. When a dozen-something breaths passed, Su Ming let out a long breath. His eyes were bright, and he wiped away the blood from his eyes and ears. He lowered his head and cast a glance at the 7th knot on the white strand of hair, and a hint of a smile appeared at the corners of his lips. This art is indeed shocking. If I can understand it to the pinnacle, then I will be able to kill without a trace, and it won't be difficult for me to control others. But it's a pity that the backlash is also incredibly great. Su Ming closed his eyes. Almost at the instant Su Ming tied the 7th knot, the meditating old woman in the 2nd floor started trembling viciously. When she coughed up a mouthful of blood, her face turned livid with rage. When she opened her eyes, She stood up swiftly and spread her divine sense outwards, but she still found nothing. Her face was dark. During that instant just now, she had vaguely heard a voice. That voice seemed to be saying something in her head, but when she listened carefully, she could not hear it clearly. However, she had a strong feeling that the words spoken by that voice had been carved into her soul through a unique method. Child's play. Since you're hiding and unwilling to come out, then let's fight with our arts. Let's see whether your strange art is stronger or my soul, catching lotus platform, is stronger. The old woman laughed coldly and walked towards the second floor. She arrived beside the statue of the woman sitting on the lotus platform on the first floor, and once she cast a glance at the pure and holy woman, she sat down cross-legged. Immediately, the statue's eyes shone with a brilliant light, as if it had just woken up and enveloped the old woman within. Next time you come, I will fight against you. The old woman closed her eyes, as if she was about to face a great enemy. The second chapter is here, to be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 678. I can see everyone's support for me. I am grateful. There are people who misunderstood me. I can only smile bitterly. Fengling and I are good friends. He will understand me. I continue to write. I will challenge 90 chapters, which I have never dared to dream of in my entire writing career, seeking monthly votes. Thank you, everyone. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 679. However, even after another month had passed, Su Ming still did not manage to tie the 8th knot on the strand of hair. There were 3 times when he wanted to tie it, but every single time he was about to do so, he would pause for a moment. He did not feel it. He did not find the vague feeling that ugly little thing's father had mentioned. In this state, he had a premonition that if he forcefully tied the 8th knot, he would face a failure where all his previous efforts would go to waste. That was why Su Ming put down the strand of hair for the first time during these 2 months. He no longer tried to tie it by force, but instead chose to calm himself down. I need to find someone else to test the doll formed by the grass knot record-keeping art. Only by doing so can I be certain that I won't make a mistake with the 8th knot. Su Ming closed his eyes slightly. It was now winter, and the first day of the year was getting closer and closer. Based on the customs of his hometown, the first day of the year was the most important day of the year. All the families would gather together and be filled with happiness and warmth. Su Ming still remembered that day last year. He had still been recovering in Ugly Little Thing's house. That was the first time he had experienced true warmth in his life after he left Dark Mountain. This warmth was different from the 9th summit, but it was just as precious. It was the feeling of a mother, the care of a father, and the joy of a little sister. It's time for Ugly Little Thing's family to be reunited. Su Ming mumbled softly. Chun Dashi's soul and physical body had already fused together a few days ago, and he could wake up at any moment. Su Ming had waited for 2 months and did not bring him back to Ugly Little Thing's house because he was still observing evil spirit sex actions towards him after Zhao Chong died. During these 2 months, he was certain that evil spirit sect would no longer pay attention to this matter. In the midst of his thoughts, Su Ming lifted his head. Once he cast a glance into the distance, he no longer bothered himself with it. He closed his eyes and began meditating quietly. Before long, he saw a few people walking towards him from the snow in the distance. The person in the lead was Qianxin. His face was dark, and he held a bag in his hand. When he stepped on the snow and approached Su Ming, he stopped 100 feet away from him. There was a hesitant look on his face, but after a moment, a cold sneer appeared on his lips. Junior brother Chun, this place is pretty good, right? There's a lot of spiritual aura here, and the snow is beautiful. More importantly, this place is quiet and secluded. It's a good place to cultivate. Su Ming remained calm, as if he did not hear him. Qianxin had been very attentive during the first month, but during the second month, he gradually came less. Every single time he came, he would size up Su Ming with a suspicious look. Junior brother Chun, You said you came down from the outer sect. Just tell me the truth, and I won't make things too difficult for you. I'll arrange an errand boy job for you. You go your own way, and I'll mind my own business. We won't offend each other. But you actually dare to lie to me. If I hadn't sent people to the outer sect to investigate your background, I really would have been deceived by you. Less than a year after you entered the sect, your master disappeared 2 months ago, and because you were nothing, you were kicked out of the outer sect. How cunning of you to come here and act like a tyrant. Is this a place where you can come? Let me tell you, Chun. The more Chen spoke, the angrier he became. He was angry that he had misjudged Chen Fan. He had thought that Chen Fan had a powerful background, but the truth was that this was not the case. This was a huge blow to him. It made him feel that his ability to judge people, which he had honed for more than 20 years, had been wrong. This was something he could not forgive, especially since he had been completely buried in the dark. If it wasn't for the fact that he hadn't contacted the outer sect for more than a month, and that the outer sect seemed to have forgotten about him, it wouldn't have been surprising if it had been any other time. But now that it was nearing the end of the year, the outer sect would have a yearly competition. If it was an expert, regardless of cultivation or background, it would be revealed in this competition. Most of the disciples from the outer sect Chun had met in the past who had been punished would be summoned back at this time. However, no matter how he waited, he did not see anyone coming to Su Ming's side. In his anxiety, he activated his power and had the laborers he had sent out to search for information. However, the information that was sent back to him dealt a huge blow to him. He was stunned for a long time before he eventually stomped his feet. Su Ming's arrival was explained clearly in the information. Chun, how could you be so cunning at such a young age? Today, I'll let you know that you can't lie so easily. Chen was livid. He rolled up his sleeves, and the people behind him did the same. All of them had fierce looks on their faces. How dare you come to my land and offend me? Today, not only will I beat you up, I'll also send you to another place. This is not a place where you can stay. Chen took a huge step forward. Just as he was about to close in on Su Ming opened his eyes slowly and cast Chen a calm glance. There was no power contained in that glance, but the calmness in Su Ming's eyes caused Chen's footsteps to come to an abrupt halt once he saw it. He even spread his arms wide to block the person who was about to rush towards him. His heart suddenly started racing against his chest. He looked into Su Ming's eyes, and a grim expression gradually appeared on his face. With his experience and knowledge, if he was in Chen's place, he would definitely panic, but the person before him was simply too calm. This sort of calmness gradually caused his skin to crawl, and he became paranoid. Could it be that I made a mistake? That's impossible. This brat only knows how to put on airs. He was like this just now, and I thought he was a powerful person. What kind of stupid, powerful person is he? Chen glared at him. When he thought of this, he took a few more steps forward with a ferocious smile on his face. Just as he lifted his fist and was about to hurl it at Su Ming, he suddenly saw a glint in Su Ming's eyes that made his skin crawl. His movements came to an abrupt halt, and he took a few steps back. He stared at Su Ming for some time, and a murderous glint shone in his eyes. He let out a cold harumph. Oh well, since you're still a child, I won't argue with you, but you can't stay in this place anymore. I'll give you 3 days, 7 days. 7 days later, I'll take this place away. At that time, if you don't obey me, Chen laughed coldly and brought the people beside him to leave quickly. Only when they were far away did he turn his head around to look at Su Ming with lingering fear in his heart. There's still something off. Looks like this person might not have any background, but he should have some abilities. But it's useless. 7 days later, when the year-end tournament ends, I'll invite some people over to suppress him. As Chen laughed coldly, his body suddenly shuddered, as if he was shivering. He quickly tightened his coat around himself, and after cursing under his breath, he brought the people behind him to the servant girls' quarters. It's better if I find a few girls to warm myself up. Ah, this is what life is like. Sitting around a stove and hugging a girl in winter. How nice is that? Chen have a pretty good life. Chen hummed a tune and forgot about the sudden shudder he had felt just now. Su Ming watched Qian Shun leave into the distance. With his level of cultivation, he only needed to release a little bit of his presence, and he would be able to kill Qian Shun without anyone noticing. However, he did not do so. At that moment, a strand of black hair appeared in his hand. That hair belonged to Qian Shun. This boy was sent to me at the right time. I can use him to figure out the various amazing uses of the grass knot record-keeping art and turn it into a doll. Without any expression on his face, Su Ming used that strand of hair to tie a knot. The end of the year gradually approached. After several months of preparation, all the outer sects of Evil Spirit Sect started a tournament for all Evil Spirit Sect disciples. This tournament was only for Evil Spirit Sect itself and had nothing to do with the other evil sects. It was held once a year, but the reason behind it was because Evil Immortal Sect, which stood supreme in the hearts of the other sects, would organize a tournament for all evil sects once every 10 years. For this grand event, Evil Spirit Sect, Evil Dust Sect, and Evil Lust Sect were all busy preparing for it. Every year, once the Outer Sect Disciple Tournament ended, besides choosing the champion to become an Inner Sect Disciple, they would also organize a tournament for the Inner Sect Disciples. The champion would also be richly rewarded. However, this had nothing to do with Su Ming. On the day of the end of the year, and the day the Outer Sect Disciples Tournament would begin, Su Ming stood up and took a step forward while snow was still falling from the sky. The moment his foot landed, his body immediately became indistinct, and he disappeared without a trace. When he reappeared, he was already at the foot of the mountain belonging to Evil Spirit Sect. His body manifested, and with an indifferent expression, he walked into the distance. The mountain protection rune of Evil Spirit Sect seemed to be completely useless against him. Even when he left into the distance, no one in Evil Spirit Sect noticed his departure. In truth, no one paid too much attention to Su Ming. After all, he only looked like a boy of 12 or 13 years of age. The snow in the sky was incredibly heavy. Su Ming walked in midair, facing the wind and the snow as he calmly walked past the snow mountains, the snow plains, and the forest covered in snow until a forest appeared before him. That forest was white because the soil was covered in snow. The trunks of the trees in the forest were also covered in a thick layer of snow, causing the branches to bend down, as if they were welcoming Su Ming's arrival respectfully. Every year, when the snow melted and the flowers bloomed in the warm spring, this forest would be filled with the fragrance of osmanthus flowers. This was the osmanthus forest. Through the gaps in the forest, Su Ming could see the village he was familiar with. He could see the lights in all the houses. The color of the lights gave off an incredibly warm feeling in the middle of the night and snow. A smile appeared on Su Ming's face. He stepped on the snow, and crunching sounds echoed in the air as he walked forward. Before him was a very normal-looking house. The light from a lamp shone through the paper window of the house, and the figure of a little girl with her hair combed back could be seen. It had been almost a year. Almost a year had passed since Su Ming left. At that moment, when all the families were reunited with each other, Su Ming stood outside the house and looked at the light from the lamp. He looked at the figure reflected in the window and mumbled softly, "Ugly little thing, big brother dog leftovers is back." I'm already exhausted by the 3rd chapter. I'll go write another one, because I promise that I'll continue writing until the last day of the month, and I won't slack off. To be continued. If you like this work, please come Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 680. A year ago, when Su Ming left, he had only recovered 1/10 of his cultivation base. At that moment, when he returned, he had recovered nearly 6/10 of his cultivation base. Yet no matter what, he was still himself. He was still the big brother goal leftovers that ugly little thing had mentioned. He was still the thin and weak but sensible youth that ugly little thing's parents thought of. Su Ming stood outside the house. He lifted his hand and knocked on the door gently. The sound of knocking was incredibly soft in the moaning of the snow and wind. It could not be heard clearly outside, but it could be heard clearly in the house. "Who is it?" A weak voice came from the house. That voice belonged to Ugly Little Thing, but there was a slight lack of strength in it. "It's me," Su Ming said softly. Once his voice traveled out, the house swiftly fell silent. Before long, the door to the house was flung open. At the instant it was done, snow and wind blew in with a howl, sweeping up snow. However, Su Ming's thin body was like a mountain at that moment, blocking the wind behind him, causing it to be unable to blow past his body, unable to blow past Ugly Little Thing, who was staring at him blankly with tears of pleasant surprise in her eyes. "Big brother, Ugly Little Thing." Ugly Little Thing cried and went up to hug Su Ming. He patted her back gently and continued using his body to block the snow and wind for her. "Don't cry, Ugly Little Thing. It's been almost a year since I last saw you, and you've grown quite a bit taller." Su Ming smiled gently. As he spoke, he lifted his head and saw a couple standing in the house. They had grayish-white hair, more wrinkles, and the marks left behind by the passage of time. Their bodies were slightly slumped, their faces were thin, and their lips were parted as if they wanted to say something through their tears. This was Ugly Little Thing's father. The woman by his side had a lot of white hair. Her beautiful face could only be vaguely seen and could no longer be seen clearly. Tears fell from her eyes, but a smile that Su Ming thought was the most beautiful in the world appeared on her face. "We're home. We've been waiting for you." It was a simple sentence, but it filled Su Ming's heart with warmth. He pulled Ugly Little Thing over and closed the door to the house. As he looked at the ordinary family before him, he knelt down on the ground. "Dad, Mom, Ugly Little Thing is back." A warmth chased away the cold wind that had blown into the house at that moment. It chased away the cold snow outside, filling the house with a warmth that could melt the winter. On that night, Ugly Little Thing's laughter echoed in the warm air, just like it had in the past. Ugly Little Thing's father's kind gaze was always on Su Ming, and Ugly Little Thing's mother brought out a cotton-padded jacket from the house. It was something she had personally sewn for him. When Su Ming wore the cotton jacket, he looked like a real teenager. There was no grief, no killing intent, no complicated emotions. There was only warmth, the warmth of a family. That night, the light in the house was never extinguished. In the darkness outside, as the cold wind blew against it, it continued burning, because perhaps what kept it burning was no longer kerosene, but the ordinary familial love within the family that Su Ming longed for. There were no complicated feelings. There was only warmth, the warmth of a family. Su Ming cherished this familial love. He placed all of it at the bottom of his heart, turning it into a beautiful part of his life, a part of his memories that he could not allow himself to lose. In this part of his memory, Ugly Little, her father, and her mother were all written down, which was also his. "I will stay by your side until the end of your days." These were the words Su Ming had said to Ugly Little Thing quietly in the past, and they were also the words he had written in his heart and his memories at that moment. Most of the time, beautiful moments were short-lived because perhaps there was an eye called loneliness in the world. It did not want to see too many beautiful moments, which was why it allowed beautiful moments and short-lived moments to coexist and cherish each other. That was why people would always say that beautiful moments were short-lived. This night would eventually come to an end, just like how beautiful moments would also come to an end even though they were short-lived. Su Ming could not stay in this place for long, because if he did, then before he recovered his cultivation base, perhaps he would bring this family a parting of life and death. The only thing he could do was to remember this brief moment of beautiful moments and then leave quietly. However, he left behind a person who was lying on a small bed and gradually opening his eyes. That person was Chun Shi, Ugly Little Thing's older brother. He was a pitiful soul. He should have had the appearance of a middle-aged man, but Su Ming could not bear to make Ugly Little Thing's parents' hearts ache for him. He could not bear to see Ugly Little Thing cry. He would rather wait for his cultivation base to recover a little longer. So he sent life force into Chun Shi's body, causing him to look as if he was 20 years old. This was fake. At the moment, he only had 10 years of life left. He would return to his original appearance. Su Ming left. He combed through Ugly Little Thing's parents' bodies, causing their illnesses to disappear and the birthmark on her face to become fainter. Then he did not push open the door to the house. Instead, he took a step forward and appeared outside the house. If I didn't push open that door of separation, then it would mean that I didn't leave, and then I would never push open that door. Behind Su Ming was an endless amount of snow. It covered the path between him and Ugly Little Thing's house, as if it had cut off their path back home. Gradually, it turned into a vast expanse of white. Su Ming walked alone on the snow. As he walked further and further into the distance, snow fell on his hair, his body, and his cotton jacket. It was very cold, but there was a warmth buried in his heart. It could warm him up in the snow and allow him to walk further. Su Ming left into the distance. He walked through the snow until his head turned white, and his figure that had disappeared from the world gradually became indistinct in the desolate air, gradually turning into snow. The moans of the wind in the snow were like a song floating in the air, and the falling snow were the lyrics of the song. It sang in the air, and no one knew who could hear it. That song sang about a city burying in the wind and snow, about loneliness extinguishing all lights, about a person's sunset, about a person's face, and about a dozen years of childhood that could not be seen in the unfamiliar world. Once Su Ming left, Chandashi, who was lying in bed in the midst of his deep sleep, slowly opened his eyes. There was a hint of bewilderment in his eyes. He felt as if he had slept for a very, very long time, and he had a very, very long dream. At the end of that dream, a voice echoed in the air, and it was this voice that had brought him out of his dream and back home. You were originally a dead person. All I can do is help you fight for 10 more years of life. Use these 10 years to accompany your parents and your little sister. I don't know how I finished writing this chapter. As I continued writing, I suddenly felt as if I had a sudden epiphany. There's simply no other way to describe it, so I'll just use this to describe it. I felt as if I was filled with energy in an instant, but as I continued writing, I became even more exhausted. When I look back on this month, there's only one word left in my mind. It has nothing to do with fatigue. I won't say it. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 681. I won, first in the monthly votes. I remember that the last time I got first was last July. It had been more than a year since I got first. It was so heavy that I couldn't hold on to it. At this moment, my eyes were wet. That was because the submoderator Wang Ping told me a lot about everything that everyone did in this October. General Alliance, Fei Er, Central Army, Wang Shi, Under the Moon, Water, Long Sleeve, L Alliance, Longzi, Fifth Brother, Milk Bamboo, Yama Little Lee, Silly Pepper, Wall Watermelon, TNI 1, Tooba. There were too many. There were even more people, Tieba, 3943, etc. There were also the return of the old Alliance Masters of Renegade Celestial. I couldn't say them all, but I would remember them in my heart. Friendship is something that people often talk about, and I've said it many times. But it wasn't until today, until that moment just now, that I suddenly understood the word friendship. That was because at that moment, when I heard the submoderator's words, I didn't know how to express my inner feelings. Everything was just friendship. No matter how many words I contributed, I would get royalties. However, your contributions didn't ask for anything in return. Just because everyone was killing because I was shouting that I wanted to be first, you didn't hesitate to contribute. This first, it wasn't mine, it was yours. This sentence seemed fake and empty, but at this moment, it was in my heart. It was from the bottom of my heart. I said it before. Number one, no matter win or lose, I would treat you to drinks. In front of me, there was beer and white wine. I want to drink today. I raised my glass to the computer screen. I toast to you. First, to everyone in the demon army. Drink. I drank. Second, to everyone in the demon army. Drink. The third salute is to everyone in the devil army. Your sacrifice, everything you've done. Do you know? You've made me regret fighting for this monthly vote. Maybe people would misunderstand and slander me, but I just wanted to say that I really regretted it. This was my true emotion, and I wanted to express it without fear of being misunderstood and slandered. Third, to you, cheers. Fourth, to the tea house, to the vice leader. Cheers. The The fifth toast, I want to toast Feng Ling because we're brothers. We've agreed to meet on the third to drink, and we must get drunk. The sixth toast, to all the neutral parties, thank you for your help. A toast to you. 6 cups of wine is inauspicious. For more cups of wine, these 4 cups of wine, I will bring them all to the devil army. My wine is right in front of me. I'll drink. I won't say those touching or stirring words. All my words will be emptied in these 10 glasses of wine. I hope that you can all go to sleep now. This October, you've all worked hard, and I feel sorry for you. Listen to me and go to sleep. If there's anything, we'll talk tomorrow. Forget about the monthly votes. Everyone, go to sleep. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 682. Qian had been incredibly gloomy lately. He was constantly paranoid, and no matter what he did, he had to be careful. His body was not built to begin with, and now he had become even thinner. In fact, his face was even paler, and most of the time he looked dazed. Even the expressions of the people beside him would immediately change when they saw him, as if they had just seen a fiendish demon. They would quickly avoid him, and some of those who could not avoid him would look around in fear, though no one knew what they were looking at. Just like at that moment, there were 3 miscellaneous disciples at the foot of Evil Spirit Mountain who immediately became nervous when they saw Qian Chun walking towards them while swaying with his hands on his head. Just as they were about to search for a place to hide, Qian Chun saw them with just one glance. "Stay where you are." The 3 of them trembled, but one of them did not stop at all. He continued to grit his teeth and flee with all his might. However, the remaining 2 hesitated for a moment. Qian Chun stared at them and saw their appearances. Naturally, they were unable to continue fleeing. Senior brother Qian. When the 2 people who could not escape saw Qian Chun, anguished expressions immediately appeared on their faces, and their voices trembled. "Senior brother Qian, you're so merciful. Please let us go. We're loyal to you, Senior brother Qian. Please don't harm us." Bulsh *T. Qian Chun glared at them and rubbed his forehead before putting his hand down. There was blood on his forehead, and there was even some dirt on it. Clearly, he had fallen not too long ago and injured his head. As if he was filled with indignation toward his fate over the past few days, Qian Chun kicked a big tree beside him. He did not use much strength in that kick, but for some unknown reason, the tree suddenly started swaying, and with a bang, it went crashing towards him and the other 2 people. This scene stunned Qian Chun for a moment before he quickly retreated with incredible agility to avoid the tree. However, his robes were torn by the branches, and he looked incredibly pathetic. The other 2 people had already used all their speed to escape, and no matter how Qian Chun called out to them, they did not turn their heads back. Don't ever turn your head back. That Qian Chun is currently down on his luck. Not only is he down on his luck, all those who are beside him are down on their luck as well. Isn't that so? Little 6 was with him yesterday, and the 2 of them directly fell into an ice hole. When have there ever been an ice hole on us? I heard about it as well. A few days ago, Qian Chun went to the maidservant's quarters, and he fell down 19 times in succession on the way. Later on, he was so terrified that he didn't even dare to walk as he was afraid that he would fall to his death. That's nothing. Let me tell you, I saw it with my own eyes. Qian Chun nearly choked to death when he was drinking water. How strange. This sort of talk gradually spread through the mountain at the foot of Evil Spirit Mountain, and gradually more people came to know about it. Qian Chun was like a fiend, and wherever he went, everyone would run away, not daring to get close to him. Qian Chun's face was extremely pale. His entire body was curled up in a small vat as he stared blankly at the sky. He wondered if he had offended the Tai Sui. Otherwise, why would he be so unlucky for half a month? All of this started from the day he went to the maidservant's quarters. He did not fall 19 times, but 37 times, until he fell so much that his body started trembling and fear filled his face. He had a feeling that if he continued walking down the mountain, he would become the first disciple in Evil Spirit sect to fall to his death on the snowy ground. From then on, he had to fall when he walked, and he had to be careful of ice holes. When he thought of those ice holes, Chun smiled wryly. He still remembered how he had nearly choked to death when he drank water over the past few days, which was why his heart still trembled in fear when he drank water. When he ate, he would also observe his food carefully before he dared to eat, because for some unknown reason, he had nearly been poisoned to death the last time he ate. Damn it. Just what is going on? Chun looked at the small vat he was in and wanted to cry, but no tears came out. It was another ice hole. Once he fell into this small vat, and this was also an enchanted vessel, causing him to be stuck inside and unable to get out. After a long while, he saw someone passing by, and as he screamed for help and threatened them, he was dragged out. Once Chun walked out, he felt so aggrieved that he was about to go mad. He was just about to stomp his feet to vent his anger, but the moment he lifted his foot, he immediately put it down gently. Just as he was about to turn around and leave, suddenly, a sword glare charged towards him from a certain spot in the outer sect with a loud whistle, scaring Chun so much that he was completely dumbfounded. During that moment of life and death crisis, the sword glare practically grazed past his waist and landed on a mountain rock. Immediately after, a long arc flew towards him, and within it was a teenager. That teenager had a rather hesitant expression on his face, as if he was very embarrassed. Once he flew over, he took out his sword and cast a glance at the stupefied Chun. He wanted to leave, but felt that he should say something. "You should leave," Chun said with a crying face. I know this isn't your fault. Your flying sword suddenly went out of control and flew here on its own." Despair appeared on Chun's face. Senior brother, I'll be leaving first." The teenager was momentarily stunned, but what he said was indeed the truth. After hesitating for a moment, he immediately flew away. "I knew it would be like this." Chin's body swayed to the side. Once he fell to the side, his expression was blank. He was about to go mad, and he did not know what was going on. Today should be the end, right? Chun cast a glance at the sky, then laughed wryly and was about to stand up. His companion who had dragged him out of the vat had long since disappeared. He had no idea where he was washing his hands and praying to his ancestors that he would not be implicated. But before he could stand up, a cold voice came from the sky. "Chun, what are you doing over there?" The person who spoke was an old woman. She was not someone from the two-story building, but was another sect elder from the outer sect. She had some sort of connection with Chun. When Chun heard the voice, he immediately rose to his feet. His expression was one of reverence, but the instant he stood up, his pants fell down, along with all the clothes on his lower body. Chun stared blankly at the cold air he was wearing. The old woman was also stunned. Then, her expression changed and turned dark. Once she cast Chun a cold glance, she swung her arm and left without saying a single word. Chun fell to the ground once again with a thud. He stared at the sky blankly, and his mind was completely blank. This isn't right. This is definitely not right. I must have offended someone. After a long while, Chun pulled up his pants while shivering. He looked incredibly haggard at that moment, as if he had suddenly become much older. He tried to remember who he had offended before his first misfortune befell him. If it had been any other time, he would not have been able to think about it, because he had offended far too many people. However, before his first misfortune befell him, his heart had been filled with anger because of Su Ming, and he did not have time to care about anyone else. If there was anyone he had truly offended, then it was only Su Ming. Su. The more Chun thought about it, the more he felt that his guess was correct. When he remembered how calm Su Ming was, he became even more certain of his guess. He immediately stood up, pulled up his pants with one hand, and quickly ran towards where Su Ming was. Su Ming was sitting cross-legged outside his house. In his hand was a strand of hair with 10 knots. Those strands of hair were woven together to form the shape of a small person. There were also some weeds in front of Su Ming. He was adding them into the knot, and gradually, a doll made of weeds appeared in his hand. There are 10 knots, and each of them contains a faint power of the curse. This curse won't take a person's life, but it will make things difficult for them. Su Ming looked at the doll in his hand, and a smile appeared on his face. Through this experiment, he had finally succeeded after failing a few times, causing him to be even more confident in his ability to control the old woman in the two-story building. You and I don't have too much a grudge between us, so I won't tie the 11th knot for you. Otherwise, if things don't go smoothly for you, someone will die. Su Ming lifted his head and cast a glance into the distance. His expression was indifferent, but before long, Qian Chun appeared on the snow in the distance. Right after he took a few steps forward, he immediately fell down and ran towards Su Ming with his head bleeding. On the way, he fell 8 more times before he was dozens of feet away from Su Ming and knelt down on the ground with a thud. "Sir, please spare me. I know my wrongs. Please give me a chance. Spare me." Qian Chun was in a pathetic state. He had fallen dozens of times on the way, and there were even a few times where he had nearly died. There was no way he would not be afraid, especially when he saw Su Ming. He immediately saw the weed doll in Su Ming's hand, and his heart instantly let out a thump. With a crying face and tears falling down his face, Qian Chun kowtowed repeatedly before Su Ming and started begging nonstop. He was certain that all of this was related to Su Ming. When he thought about how he might have to face this sort of terrifying life in the future and how he might even get stuck even when he was sleeping or snoring, a fear towards Su Ming that he did not even feel towards the sect elders of Evil Spirit Sect. "From now on, unless I summon you, none of you are allowed to step into this place," Su Ming said slowly. Once he said those words, Qian Chun immediately nodded. A pitiful look appeared on his face, but his heart was filled with shock. Su Ming's acknowledgement made the final shred of doubt in his heart disappear. At that moment, there was a voice crying out in his heart. "I've finally seen the person ranked at the top of the do not provoke rank I've set for the past 20 years. When Qian Chun set the do not provoke rank, he had fantasized about whether there would come a day when a powerful senior would turn into a normal disciple and join the sect, and he would coincidentally run into him. However, he did not expect that such a day would truly come. Su Ming lifted his right hand and patted the weed doll. Immediately, it turned into a layer of black smoke before Qian Chun's eyes. That black smoke dissipated with a bang, and at the instant it disappeared, Qian Chun did not know whether it was just a figment of his imagination, but he felt his body immediately become much warmer. When he looked at Su Ming, faint shock could be seen in his eyes, and his respect for him grew even stronger. "Leave. Without my summons, do not come here," Su Ming said calmly. Qian Chun quickly voiced his obedience and left in a hurry. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 683. It was late at night. The moon was bright, and there were few stars in the sky. There was no snow. Perhaps it was because the moon's light shone on the ground, but the ground was covered in a layer of silver, causing the night to not be dark. When Su Ming lifted his head, he could see a faint light shining on the two-story building located at the middle of the mountain. Su Ming held a strand of white hair in his hand. There were 7 knots on that strand of hair. When Su Ming averted his gaze from the two-story building, he looked at the strand of hair in his hand, and a glint appeared in his eyes. As that glint appeared in his eyes, he immediately moved his hands and instantly tied the 8th knot. The instant it appeared, Su Ming's heart trembled. He immediately felt a faint power appear and gather on that knot, as if it was struggling and fighting back. At the same time, the eyes of the white-haired old woman who had been waiting for a month on the first floor of the two-story building flew open, and a strange light shone in her eyes. "You're finally here." She formed a seal with her hands and pointed at the statue. Immediately, the statue of the woman before her shone with a gentle light. Once it enveloped the old woman, she closed her eyes. Almost at the instant she did so, an illusory shadow immediately appeared around the old woman in the building and beyond the gentle screen of light from the statue. That shadow was a strand of white hair. That strand of hair circled around the room, and as it did so, knots appeared on it. There was also an ancient presence spreading out in all directions. As the long strand of hair circled around the room, it continued to tie knots, and that ancient presence became thicker and thicker. "I am your master. You must obey my will." A muffled voice echoed in the room. More accurately speaking, it echoed in the old woman's heart, causing her to tremble. Her hands continued forming seals, and with that gentle light, she fought against the knots that appeared around her. There were 8 knots on that strand of hair at that moment, and each of them contained an ancient presence, causing the voice in the old woman's heart to seem as if it had been branded into her soul, and it did not disappear even after a long time had passed. Even divine senses would not be able to detect this. If anyone else pushed open the door to the building at that moment, they would not see the illusory shadow of the long strand of hair, but the old woman meditating alone. This was a battle of minds, and it belonged only to Su Ming and the old woman. While the old woman was fighting against the knot of hair, Su Ming's heart trembled, and the world around him changed swiftly. What he saw was a gigantic lotus platform. There were faint murmurs coming from the lotus platform, and they were speaking words Su Ming could not hear clearly. A woman gradually walked towards him. There was a gentle light spreading out from her body, and when Su Ming saw her, he immediately recognized her. She was the statue of the woman from the first layer of the tower. However, right now, this woman seemed to have come back to life. She had a smile on her face, carrying a pure and holy aura as she slowly approached. "My protector in my previous life, I have waited for you for a long time in this life. You have finally come." The woman's voice was gentle, and there was a will within it that shook Su Ming's soul. "Before you died, you once told me that if time could be repeated, if life could be reversed, if there would come a day when we would meet again, and if you no longer remember me, then allow us to walk together in the wind and snow until our hair turns white." The woman was dressed in a long white robe. When she arrived before Su Ming, her eyes were gentle, and with a pure and holy expression, she stared at him. Her beauty seemed to have turned into a light that caused the world to lose its color at that moment, as if it wanted to be branded into Su Ming's soul. "Come with me. Let me help you activate the memories of your past life." The woman smiled gently and stretched out her hand to place it in front of Su Ming, as if she was waiting for him to hold it. Su Ming lifted his head and looked at the beautiful woman before him. In his eyes, she seemed rather familiar, but Su Ming did not want that familiarity. His expression was aloof. When he looked at her, he tied the 9th knot on the white strand of hair in his hand. At the instant the 9th knot appeared, grief immediately appeared on the woman's face. Tears fell from her eyes, and when they fell on the lotus platform, they let out a soft thud. In the midst of it, the world where Su Ming was shattered, just like the tears at the same time, the 9th knot appeared on the illusory strand of hair that surrounded the gentle light around the old woman in the 2-story building. At the instant the 9th knot appeared, a wave of black smoke spread out from the strand of hair. It charged towards the gentle light around the old woman, as if it wanted to tear it apart and rush into her body. The old woman's face turned pale. Her hands changed again, and she mumbled under her breath as if she was chanting some sort of incantation. She even bit the tip of her tongue and coughed up a mouthful of blood. Once she coughed up the blood, it immediately disappeared. Soon after, the world before Su Ming's eyes fused together once more as it crumbled and shattered, but it turned into another world. That world was covered in a blood-red hue. That blood-red hue did not come from fresh blood, but maple leaves that filled the sky. They were crimson red, and they danced in the air before being blown away by the wind and gradually falling on the ground. Su Ming was sitting cross-legged. He was dressed in a long red robe, and in his arms was an incredibly beautiful woman. She was staring at him in a daze. Blood trickled out of the corners of her mouth, but there was a beautiful and gentle smile on her face. She lifted her trembling hand and touched Su Ming's face. The gentleness on her face caused the familiar feeling to appear once Su Ming saw it. This time, That feeling seemed to have turned into an ocean that wanted to drown him. You still can't remember me. You didn't remember me in this life. I will wait. I will wait for our next life to meet. I will wait for you to remember me in the next life. As the woman spoke, her face gradually turned pale. Her breathing gradually disappeared, but her gentleness was branded into Su Ming's eyes, causing his heart to tremble. Kiss me. The beautiful woman touched Su Ming's face and uttered the last words in her life. The familiar feeling in Su Ming's heart turned into a great wave of grief and pain at that moment. It was as if the woman's voice made him feel as if he had lost the entire world. He trembled and lowered his head, intending to kiss the woman's lips. But right at the instant his lips were about to touch hers, Su Ming closed his eyes, and in anguish he spoke softly. I only want to use this place to restore my cultivation base and reach Berserker's soul realm. I don't have any intention of harming you. Once I leave, I will return you your freedom. Why must you do this? This familiarity is something you forced on me. This memory is also the result of the soul catcher you cast. When Su Ming opened his eyes, they were clear. He tied the 10th knot on that strand of hair with his hands. At the instant he did so, the woman before him laughed brokenly, and she shattered along with the world. At the same time, the old woman in the first layer of the 2-story building shuddered. Her hair was no longer white, but had turned black. The wrinkles on her face gradually disappeared, and in their place was a moist, pinkish hue. She turned from an old woman to a middle-aged woman in an instant. Her appearance changed, and she turned into an incredibly beautiful woman. Judging by her appearance, besides their age, she was incredibly similar to the woman in the statue. It was as if they were the same person. Once the 10th knot appeared on the illusory strand of hair, the gentle screen of light around her immediately devoured the gentle light and charged towards the old woman. It surrounded her body, and a powerful will that she could not fight against instantly turned into an awe-inspiring might in her soul. I am your master. You must obey my orders. The old woman shuddered once again, and her appearance changed once more. In an instant, she turned into a girl in her 20s, and her appearance was no longer any different from the statue. Her eyes flew open, and a purple glare flashed briefly in them. When the woman and the world shattered and fused together once again, Su Ming did not see the woman. What he saw was Dark Mountain. That familiar presence, that familiar voice, and the smoke from the chimneys in the tribe during the morning. What he saw was a man with long purple hair walking towards Dark Mountain tribe, with an aloof expression on his face. He held a long purple blade in his hand. Su Ming could not see the front of the purple figure. He could only see his long hair dancing in the wind. Screams of pain and shrill roars filled the air. It did not matter whether they were men, women, old, or young. Their expressions were filled with despair and regret. Lei Chen's tearful roars and questions, Chen Xian's stunned expression, Bei Ling's grief, and the elder's pale face and grief-stricken eyes. He saw the entire tribe being killed by the purple-haired figure in an instant. Lei Chen's head flew into the air and fell by Su Ming's feet. Bei Ling, who had been protecting Chen Xian, turned into ashes. Tong Tong, the little girl, cried. When the purple-haired figure walked past her, he seemed to hesitate for a moment before he took her life. Everything turned into ruins before Su Ming's eyes and turned into a pool of blood. Su Ming was stunned. He felt as if he had lost the right to speak, until he saw the purple-haired figure turn his head around and look towards him. Only at that moment did Su Ming see that the purple-haired figure with the cold expression on his face was himself. He held a bloody head in his right hand, and when he looked towards Su Ming, he threw it towards him. It fell before Su Ming and landed beside Lei Chen's head. That head was filled with white hair, and it belonged to the elder. Even when he died, his eyes were wide open, and in the midst of his anguish and regret, they were practically empty. The purple-haired figure walked towards Su Ming, and when he stood before him, he stabbed the blade in his hand into the ground. With an aloof expression, he tore open his robes and revealed his chest. Kill me. This was the first thing the purple-haired figure said since the start. Kill him, and you will be able to take revenge for Dark Mountain. Kill him, and you will be free. Kill him. This voice echoed in Su Ming's ears. In silence, anguish appeared on Su Ming's face. He picked up the long purple blade in front of him, and once he slowly pulled it out of the ground, he swiftly turned around and slashed at the long blade behind him. With that one slash, the entire world, along with his long blade, shattered with a loud bang. Behind him, the beautiful woman who had appeared at some point in time was also shattered by that long blade. She stood there in a daze, staring blankly into the distance. As the long blade and the world crumbled, Su Ming's hands tied the 11th knot on that strand of hair. Knots are also a disaster. I understand now, Su Ming mumbled. October ended. During this month, if you want to rest, everyone should also rest and immerse themselves in the world of novels. But don't leave the recommendation tickets lying around. There's still a guaranteed monthly ticket. Don't force yourself to subscribe to it. If you have it, give it to me. If you don't, it's fine. To be continued. If you like this novel, please come to Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 684. At the instant Su Ming tied the 11th knot and the world before his eyes crumbled. The shards scattered like a shattered mirror. There was a woman looking at him in grief on each of the shards. She was incredibly beautiful, and as the world crumbled, she gradually left into the distance. When the area around Su Ming was once again filled with white snow, the low houses and the weeds growing on the snow, his world returned to normal, and he returned to the foot of Evil Spirit Mountain. At the same time, in the two-story building located at the middle section of Evil Spirit Mountain was the girl who had turned from an old woman. Her body was trembling at that moment, and her face was pale as she gritted her teeth and fought back. Yet all of this changed the instant the 11th knot was tied on the illusory, white strands of hair around her. The appearance of the 11th knot caused the voice echoing in the girl's soul to increase by several fold, as if it had turned into some sort of law. It roared in the girl's soul, and in the end, it was branded into her soul. I am your master. You must obey my orders. The young woman's body trembled, and she coughed up a mouthful of blood. However, at the instant she coughed up the blood, the black chi in the surroundings suddenly rushed toward her. In the blink of an eye, the black chi disappeared. It had all drilled into the young woman's body and disappeared without a trace. Soon after, the illusory strands of hair with 11 knots around her also disappeared, as if nothing had happened. However, the girl's pale face was a clear sign that what had happened just now was real. Just who is this person? The girl closed her eyes. She had lost, and she had lost completely to the divine ability she was most skilled in. She had never been able to see this person's face. The illusion she had cast on him just now had been created by her art. If she had successfully immersed him in it, then she would have been able to see his face, and she would have been able to turn him into her slave. But she had failed. Anguish appeared on the girl's face. She had a deep understanding of the meaning behind the words he had branded into her soul. At that moment, she could not do anything that would bring him any harm. This was not a game of words. This was a surge that had been branded into her soul with just one sentence. She knew that even if she didn't know who they were, they would come. This was a battle of arts that did not have any sort of collision. It was a battle between the girl's soul catcher art and Su Ming's grass knot art. It was like a storm in their minds that swept through their bodies and minds. At that moment, with the appearance of the 11th knot, the battle came to an end. The price of ending was not death, but a soul being controlled. On the snow at the foot of Evil Spirit Mountain, Su Ming opened his eyes. In his hand was a strand of white hair. There were 11 knots on it, and he was weaving them into the shape of a small human. A hint of fatigue appeared in Su Ming's eyes. The battle of arts, just now, was much more dangerous than he had imagined. He had to admit that he had underestimated the old woman, or rather, he had underestimated the girl who had turned into an old woman. This person's soul catcher art has already reached a state where it can affect memories. If she can improve further, then the results of this battle will be unknown. A glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes. He picked up the weeds by his side and quickly started weaving them together. After a moment, a weed doll appeared in his hand. Inside the doll were the 11 knots of white hair. Once he finished weaving the doll, Su Ming swept his gaze across it, and he sensed a presence that belonged to the person holding the doll. This person hasn't lost her mind. She will only listen to the orders of the person holding the doll. This is something that her soul can't fight against. Su Ming looked at the sky, then put away the doll, closed his eyes, and began meditating to train. This was one of the few times he could meditate and train after he came to this place. Right then, everything was ready, and the east wind had arrived. Su Ming could finally be at ease, and as he meditated, he waited for daylight to arrive. The night passed by quickly. When the morning sun shone brightly from the sky and fell on the ground, causing the snow on the ground to reflect a piercing light, Su Ming opened his eyes. He stood up, smoothed out his robes, and walked into the distance at a moderate pace until he arrived outside the hall where the laborers were located. Right before him, Qin Shan was pointing at the laborers beside him with a sour look on his face. He was scolding them nonstop, and his spit flew into the air, but the laborers did not dare avoid him. They simply voiced their obedience. The smug look on Qian Shen's face at that moment was too great compared to when he was in Su Ming's place. Su Ming cast Qian Shen a glance and let out a cough. When that cough fell into Qian Shen's ears, it caused his scolding words to come to an abrupt halt. He shuddered, then turned his head around. Once he saw Su Ming, not a single hint of hesitation could be seen on his face. His expression turned into one of obsequiousness, and he quickly ran over. Once he stopped before Su Ming, he looked as if he was about to kneel down and worship him. "Greetings, Senior Brother Chun. Senior Brother, if there's anything you need, just tell me. It doesn't matter whether I can do it or not. I will do it without hesitation." His actions immediately caused the laborers who had been scolded to widen their eyes, and their expressions turned blank. "Give me a plate to head to the outer sect," Su Ming said flatly. He wanted this plate because the higher he went in evil spirit sect, the more seals there would be. It was not as if he could not get a plate, but if he did, things would be much simpler. When Qian Shen heard these words, he immediately patted his chest and brought out a blue plate from his bosom before handing it to Su Ming respectfully. "Senior Brother Chun, this plate might only be blue, but it's the highest plate in the laborers' quarters. With this plate, you can even enter the inner sect. But you will be stopped at the inner sect's mountain gate, and you will need someone from the inner sect to summon you before you can enter." Su Ming took the plate and nodded towards Qian Shen. Qian Shen's spirits immediately lifted. Su Ming's nod was the greatest form of acknowledgement to him, and it made him feel slightly excited for a period of time. Su Ming no longer bothered with Qian Shen. He took the plate, turned around, and left. Even when Su Ming had left into the distance, Qian Shen still stood there respectfully to see him off for a moment before he returned with a pleased look on his face. He waved his hand at the laborers, and it was clear that he was in a good mood, so he let them go. Su Ming walked up the stairs leading to Evil Spirit Sect. There were statues by his side, and vengeful souls surrounded the area, but none of them dared to get any closer. Su Ming walked up the stairs. He did not choose to head there secretly at night, but chose to head there early in the morning. Due to the blue plate, Su Ming easily moved past the hidden seals on the way as the blue plate shone. When he arrived at the path leading to Conscience Interrogation Hall, which was close to the two-story building, Su Ming was blocked by two outer sect disciples who stood there. The two disciples had apathetic expressions on their faces, and their eyes were aloof, as if there was not a hint of emotion within them. At that moment, they were staring at Su Ming without a single word as they blocked his path. With an indifferent expression, Su Ming tossed the blue plate in his hand towards the two people. "I am Chun Su from the foot of the mountain. I came here on orders from Conscience Interrogation Hall." One of the two aloof outer sect disciples caught the plate and cast Su Ming a glance with a frown. He had not received any orders that someone from the lower mountain would come, but once he cast a glance at the blue plate, he did not speak. Instead, he turned around and walked towards Conscience Interrogation Hall. The girl was meditating quietly in the two-story building in Conscience Interrogation Hall at that moment. Her face was dark. She had originally thought that he would appear the previous night, but after waiting for an entire night, she had not seen a single trace of him. It was already morning, and he must have been wary of something. He might only appear at night. Just as she was feeling vexed, she lifted her head with a frown and looked outside the building. A moment later, a respectful voice came from outside the pavilion. Hall Master, a disciple from the lower mountain, Chun Su, requests an audience. The girl was feeling incredibly vexed. When she heard Chun Su's name, the image of the dull-witted boy from a few months ago appeared in her head. She had not paid much attention to where he had been sent, but now that she heard his words, it was clear that he had been sent to be a laborer. The girl did not think too much about it, and immediately started scolding him. You even came to ask an audience with a laborer? If dozens of laborers came to greet you in a day, then wouldn't you also have to come and ask dozens of questions? The aloof expression on the disciple's face turned into one of awkwardness, and a hint of terror appeared on his face. He quickly knelt down and voiced his obedience. His heart was already filled with hate towards Su Ming, and just as he was about to get up and leave, the girl's voice suddenly came from behind him once again. Wait, did this person say why he came to greet me? A thought suddenly appeared in the girl's heart as she stood in the two-story building. Even though she found it slightly inconceivable and her idea was just too absurd, she still instinctively asked that question. Hall Master, this person said that he came under your orders, or else I wouldn't have come to ask you. The evil spirit sect disciple looked slightly wronged. A glint appeared in the girl's eyes. After a moment of pensive silence, she spoke. Limin, the evil spirit sect disciple, was momentarily stunned. He might have been puzzled, but he did not dare show it on his face. He was also uncertain about Su Ming, so he put away the thought of taking revenge just now and quickly walked towards a mountain gate outside Conscience Interrogation Hall. Soon, Su Ming returned to the place with the disciple leading the way. His expression was indifferent all along the way as he looked at the plants around him, even though it was winter. He sensed the thick power of the world in the place, and when he arrived outside the two-story building, the evil spirit sect disciple beside him hesitated for a moment before he took a few steps back and stood there. You can leave now. The girl's voice came from the two-story building. Her voice was incredibly cold, and when the evil spirit sect disciple heard it, he immediately obeyed, lowered his head, and left quickly. Once he left, Su Ming and the girl were the only ones left in the tower. After a moment, an impatient, cold harumph came from the two-story building. When did I ever summon you? Su Ming's expression remained calm. Once he cast a glance at the building, he spoke languidly. Why aren't you coming down to greet me when you saw me? The moment those words fell into the girl's ears, it was as if the sky had been shattered. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 685. You. The eyes of the woman in the two-story building went wide at that moment, and disbelief appeared in her eyes. She stood up, and with a single move, she appeared outside the building. She looked at Su Ming, and the shock in her eyes could not be hidden. She had not expected that the person who had completely defeated her would truly be this boy called Chun Su. After all, she had personally attacked a few months ago to see whether this boy was related to Zhao Chong's death. But what she had found was that there was no connection. This boy was incredibly normal, and his potential was also normal. There was not a single ripple of power within his body. But now, when this young man stood in front of her, she suddenly came to a realization. A few months ago, she had already failed in front of this young man, yet she still could not believe that this was real. She had also thought about the identity of the person who had branded his voice in her heart. To her, there was a high possibility that it was some old monster or someone she was familiar with in the sect who had intentionally changed his voice. She had thought of many people, but Shinsu was the only one she had not cast a single glance at. This was a person who had completely exceeded her imagination. At that moment, she was looking at Su Ming in a daze. She saw that he was only 12 or 13 years old, and the ancient and calm look on his face. His words and his actions were definitely not something a boy could do. "Who are you?" The woman's breathing quickened. After some time, she recovered and looked at Su Ming with a complicated expression. "Shinsu," Su Ming said slowly. "You killed Zhao Chong." The woman's expression became even more complicated. Su Ming smiled faintly. He did not accept it, but neither did he deny it. As Su Ming did not speak, the woman also fell silent, causing the area to instantly become much quieter. Only the faint sound of wind could be heard echoing in the air. After a long while, the woman smiled wryly and bowed respectfully toward Su Ming. "Greetings, master. What is your name?" Su Ming asked calmly. "Bao Qiu." The young girl sighed inwardly. After answering, her appearance gradually changed, and she finally turned into the old woman from before. She did not need to probe anything anymore. Every time the other party asked a question, the feeling that she could not refuse and that she had to tell the truth came from the depths of her soul. It made her understand that the person who fought with her yesterday was none other than Shinsu, who was in front of her. "Bao Qiu, I won't imprison you for the rest of your life." Su Ming looked at the old woman. Not a single hint of emotion could be seen on his face, as if it did not matter whether the person before him was an old woman or a beautiful girl. To him, it was all the same. The power of the world here is thick. I want to use this place to heal my wounds. In a few years, once I leave, I will return you your freedom. As Su Ming spoke, he no longer bothered with the girl and walked towards the tower. "I am now a laborer at the foot of Evil Spirit Mountain, but I will be staying at your place for a long period of time. Go and handle this." Su Ming walked into the tower and ordered. Bao Qiu remained silent for a moment before she nodded. This was an incredibly simple matter for her. She only needed to say that she needed Chun Su to be her laborer, and no one would suspect anything. Su Ming stood at the first floor of the tower and looked at the lotus platform before him, as well as the woman's statue on it. As he looked at it, the illusions he had seen previously appeared in his head, and in the end, he shook his head. Su Ming walked up to the second floor of the tower. This was clearly a woman's room, and it was filled with a faint fragrance. Su Ming sat down cross-legged, closed his eyes, and immersed himself in meditation. As he circulated his cultivation base, the thick power of the world around him immediately gathered towards him and surrounded him. He slowly absorbed it, and as it nourished his wounds, he also started walking down the path of recovering to the peak of his cultivation base. Days passed by. Bao Qiu handled the matter of Su Ming being a laborer at the foot of Evil Spirit Mountain, and no one paid any attention to him. They only knew that Lady Bao Qiu from Conscience Interrogation Hall had asked for a laborer. No one paid too much attention to this sort of trivial matter. Only Qian Chun would occasionally sigh in his heart. As time passed by, winter gradually passed by. The results for both the outer sect and inner sect Evil Spirit sect competition had long since come to an end. They started preparing and training for the next year's competition. Su Ming's place was quiet, which was a rare sight. No one came to disturb him, and he could train in peace. There were also people guarding him outside. Besides this, as long as Su Ming made a request for medicinal cores and herbs, Bao Qiu would be forced to fulfill it, even though her heart was filled with endless anguish. Gradually, as the months passed by, and when the rainy season arrived, Bao Qiu discovered something that shocked her to her very core. She could clearly remember that half a year ago, with her power in the middle stage of the Berserker Soul Realm, she had not sensed any danger from Su Ming, even though she could not see the ripples of his power. It was as if he was a puddle of clear water. However, as half a year passed by, the feeling Su Ming gave her was indeed very different from before. He might still be meditating calmly, and she might not be able to tell his level of cultivation, but at the instant he would occasionally open his eyes, Bao Qiu's heart would tremble. Her entire body would turn cold, and she would feel as if she was standing right in front of death. then there's a high possibility that I will be able to move past the initial and middle stages of the Berserker Soul realm and reach the later stage. In fact, it might even be possible for me to reach great completion in the Berserker Soul realm. Then I will take that step towards life cultivation and become a life cultivator in the world. Su Ming sucked in a deep breath. During the past half a year, he had swallowed far too many medicinal cores, and all of them had come from Bao Qiu. At that moment, just as he was about to close his eyes and immerse himself in meditation, his gaze suddenly fell on the stairs. Before long, the sound of footsteps reached his ears. Bao Qiu did not change into the appearance of an old woman, which was a rare sight. Instead, she maintained the appearance of a young girl and walked over slowly, placing 2 medicinal pill bottles before Su Ming. A hesitant look appeared on her face, as if she wanted to say something, but as she hesitated, Su Ming had already closed his eyes. She turned around quietly, but just as she was about to leave, Su Ming's voice came from behind her. "What's the matter? Speak." Bao Qiu's footsteps faltered, and she turned around to look at Su Ming. "I want to keep some pills for myself." Su Ming opened his eyes and looked at her. "The Berserker's disaster will arrive in 3 months. At that time, everyone in the sect will be in danger, and we won't be able to help them. We can only rely on ourselves to get through it. If we succeed, we can stay in the land of Berserkers for another 50 years. But if we fail, our existences will be wiped off. I've been cultivating for the past few years and have accumulated a lot of pills. Originally, I was going to use this half a year to refine a clone to replace my death. But now that I can't refine a clone, I'm going to use these last 3 months to consolidate my cultivation and give it my all. At that time, Evil Immortal Sect will send out the Celestial Maidens to help us fight against the Berserker's disaster. But even with the Celestial Maidens around, it's not completely foolproof. The risk is great. I hope that you will agree to it, Master." Su Ming narrowed his eyes. Berserker's disaster? Celestial Maiden? Bao Qiu was momentarily stunned. Once she cast Su Ming a glance, a strange light suddenly appeared in her eyes. "You are a barbarian." Bao Qiu's heart raced a few times. When she looked at Su Ming, the shock in her heart grew. She had always been suspicious about Su Ming's arrival, and only at this moment was she able to somewhat confirm her suspicions. "You might not know this, but there is a disaster waiting for the immortals who descend in the land of Berserkers and the Berserkers who have changed their blood inheritance. That disaster is the Berserker's sacred vessel. Originally, as long as the immortals in Eastern Wastelands show power that surpasses the limit, the Berserker's sacred vessel will appear. But with Sir Ji An's divine ability, he changed the pattern of the Berserker's sacred vessel's appearance, causing it to descend once every 50 years. It will last for an entire day, and it will kill all those who reveal the presence of the immortals on that day. And Sir Ji An, the paragon of evil sect, has given an order that on that day, all those who descend must reveal their power and make the Berserker's sacred vessel descend. This is a brutal trial for us. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 686. Evil Spirit Sect was not the only one doing this. At that moment, Evil Dust Sect and Evil Lust Sect were doing the same thing in Eastern Wastelands. They exuded the presences that belonged to those who had descended to Eastern Wastelands, and their presences swept up the sky. It was as if they were afraid that the Berserker's sacred vessel would not notice them. As their presences swept up the area, the weather in the entire eastern part of Eastern Wastelands changed, and thunder roared in the sky. As the world changed, a large amount of powerful presences also rushed into the sky from Evil Immortal Sect, which was the core of Evil Sect. What is Evil Sect? When the Berserker's disaster falls on all sides, only those of Evil Sect will stand above the world and have the courage to face the Berserker's disaster. At this moment, we will let all the people in the area see that not only will we of Evil Sect do the things they don't dare to do, we will also face them. Since we've come to the land of Berserkers, if we fear the Berserker's disaster and avoid it, it would be better if we didn't come at all. A ghastly voice spread out from evil immortal sect and reverberated in the area. It turned into a thunderous roar that spread through all the evil sects in Eastern Wastelands. Compared to the eastern part of Eastern Wastelands, the other four regions formed a stark contrast. It did not matter whether it was Great Leaf Immortal Sect, where Tion was, or the other sects in the immortal world, none of them revealed their presences at that moment. Clearly, they wanted to avoid the day that would make the Berserker's sacred vessel fall asleep once again. Perhaps their choice was correct, and perhaps evil sect's actions were insane, but just this one matter alone was enough to show just how different their ideals were. One wanted to fight against the Berserker's disaster in an upright manner, and the other wanted to avoid the disaster with a ghastly gaze before putting on a ferocious expression. They were like a tiger fighting against a pack of wolves. When a tiger ran into an enemy, it would usually pounce on the enemy with its momentum and rarely retreat. However, when a pack of wolves ran into an enemy, most of them would linger around the area. Occasionally, they would attack, and their attacks would be filled with malice. Almost at the same time, the four evil sects spread out their presences in the eastern part of Eastern Wastelands. A loud sound that shook the sky and earth suddenly rang out in the sky. As that sound rang out, a gigantic crack was torn open in the sky. It was as if there was an unstoppable sharpness in the sky. That sharpness cut through the sky, revealing a gigantic crack that was hundreds of thousands of feet long. When the crack appeared, it looked like a scar that existed in the sky. It was as if the sky was going to be completely torn apart. As the crack appeared, a powerful pressure descended from the crack. As it swept out, it covered the entire Eastern Wastelands. Within Evil Spirit Sect, Su Ming's eyes flew open, and he lifted his head to look at the crack in the sky. He could sense the presence of that mighty pressure. In fact, the strength of that mighty pressure had already surpassed that of South Morning's sacred vessel, the long halberd. Bao Qiu was trembling by the side, and her face instantly turned pale. Su Ming did not feel too much fear from this mighty pressure, because his body had already completely turned into that of a berserker. But Bao Qiu was different. She did not belong to the land of berserkers. She was an outsider, and the moment she sensed the mighty pressure spreading out from the crack in the sky, her heart immediately trembled. A great wave of terror descended on her uncontrollably, as if there was a mountain that could not be destroyed pressing down on her with loud, booming sounds. She could not put up much of a fight under that mighty pressure. It was as if everything was already set in stone, that she would be crushed to death by this sacred vessel of Eastern Wastelands. It's just the mighty pressure that has just appeared, and it already possesses such power. But it's not as if these evil sect members who descended here can't fight against this mighty pressure, or else they would have died a long time ago under the sacred vessel when they descended in the past. That Jian from Evil Sect wouldn't have allowed those from Evil Sect to use this as a trial either. Su Ming's expression remained as calm as ever. He did not take any action to help her. Bao Qiu's hands were swiftly forming seals as she trembled, and gradually, a sacred light spread out from her body. Su Ming stood up and no longer meditated. At that moment, the power of the world in this place had become chaotic due to the change in the sky, and it was no longer suitable for cultivation. Once he stood up, he walked to the window of the tower and lifted his head to look at the sky. He narrowed his eyes. He could vaguely sense that once the crack in the sky appeared, all the spiritual aura in the entire mountain seemed to have been sucked in, and all of it tumbled backwards towards the crack in the sky. The mountain was not the only one in this state. More accurately speaking, the entire Eastern Wastelands was in the same state. An endless amount of spiritual aura surged towards the sky in an invisible manner and was devoured by the crack. It was as if the Berserker's sacred vessel within the crack needed to use this vast amount of spiritual aura to awaken. Su Ming stood there and watched quietly. Bao Qiu's body was still trembling as she sat behind him, a telling sign that she was resisting the pressure with all her might. Time trickled by slowly. The pressure grew stronger, and eventually, it looked as if it had gained physical form. causing the sky before Su Ming's eyes to distort and even become blurry for an instant. Suddenly, a clear and drawn-out sound that seemed to be made of metal came from the sky. That sound was like a knock, and when it traveled outwards, it reverberated through the entire eastern wastelands. It made it difficult for anyone to tell just what sort of sound it was. Almost at the instant that knock reverberated in the air, Bao Chio's body froze, and blood flowed out of the corners of her mouth. Her face turned even paler, and as she moved her hands, she tapped a few spots on her body in succession. Only then did she stabilize her cultivation base, which had become chaotic due to that sound. The entire evil spirit sect fell into dead silence at that moment. At the instant that sound appeared, many of the berserkers who had changed their blood inheritance coughed up blood, and some of them even fainted as they trembled. Only the pure-blooded evil sect berserkers who descended to this place gritted their teeth and persevered as that sound reverberated in the air. They put up different forms of resistance based on their levels of cultivation. Shindong, the grand sect elder who was dressed in a long blue robe, was meditating in the black smoke at the top of Evil Spirit Sect's mountain. His expression remained the same, and not a single hint of change could be detected on his face. It was as if that sound that had caused many people's hearts to tremble was just a normal thing to him. Almost at the instant that sound spread out and reverberated in the world, a similar scene appeared in all four evil sects in Eastern Wastelands. All the berserkers who descended to this place were fighting back. The berserkers who had changed their blood inheritance might have done so to survive, might have done so because they wanted to become stronger or for other reasons, but they had changed their blood inheritance so that they could practice evil sex arts, and the price they had to pay for it was incredibly great. This price made them unworthy of being called berserkers, and they were reduced to second-class beings in evil sect. It was especially so during the berserkers' disaster that came once every 50 years. The blows they had to endure were far greater than those of the berserkers who descended to this place. It was as if the berserkers' sacred vessel loathed people like them. Every single time the berserkers' disaster came, there would be a large number of half-berserkers who had changed their blood inheritance who died. Evil Sect was not the only one affected by that sound. As the knocking sound reverberated in the air, it also reached the other immortal sects in Eastern Wastelands. However, since the immortals who descended to this place hid themselves, they did not suffer too much damage. However, the blow to their hearts and the mysteriousness of the berserkers would increase once every 50 years. Murmurs could also be heard coming from the sects that did not fight back as madly as Evil Sect. All of these voices belonged to women, and as they rose into the air languidly, a blood-red screen of light enveloped these sections. This blood-red screen of light seemed to be able to cover the sky of the land of berserkers, causing the berserkers' sacred vessel in the sky to have a hard time finding their tracks. This blood-red screen of light was something all the immortals who descended to the land of berserkers had to possess. This was the divine ability of the celestial maidens, and it was also their use. There were 8 women dressed in white among the sects that descended to this place at that moment. All of these women were beautiful, and their eyes were closed at that moment. They had their arms spread out, and before them was a small red bottle. Within those bottles were drops of blood that were incredibly precious to them and the entire immortal race. At the end of the day, the reason why they could cover the sky of the land of berserkers was because of this blood. The celestial maidens were the only ones who could spread out some of the power of their blood and cover the sky. They were the only ones who could do this. No one else could do it. There were celestial maidens in Evil Sect as well, but their use was not to cover the sky of the berserkers. Instead, under Jian's request, they had other uses. At that moment, the sound in the sky gradually faded away, but soon after, the second sound rang out with a bang. That sound seemed to have traveled even closer to the ground, and waves of dark light shone from the crack in the sky. As that dark light shone, it looked as if something was slowly revealing itself from within the crack. The second echo caused the immortals from Evil Sect to be even more shocked. Bao Qiu formed a seal with her hands and pointed forward. Immediately, an illusion appeared before her, and it was a statue that was exactly the same as the one on the lotus platform on the first floor. After the statue appeared, Bauchio's expression became slightly better. However, almost at the same time, the third, fourth, and fifth echoes rang out in the sky with a loud rumble. The instant that sound traveled outwards, the dark light from the gigantic crack in the sky abruptly became several times stronger. It illuminated the ground, causing the entire sky to look as if it was covered by it. Under that light, the crack could not be seen, neither could the blue sky. The only thing that could be seen was a circular object that was slowly descending from the sky. It was a gigantic bell. It might have seemed circular, but that was only its edge. As that thing descended, and Su Ming saw its entire form clearly, a shocking boom rang out in his head. He took a step forward, and if he had not instinctively held himself back, he would have walked out of the tower. Han Mountain Bell! Su Ming widened his eyes, and disbelief appeared on his face. His breathing quickened at that instant. The Berserker's sacred vessel that appeared in the sky was incredibly similar to Han Mountain Bell. However, there was also a difference. The only difference was that there was no picture of the nine-headed dragon on the Berserker's sacred vessel in the sky. Instead, half of it was filled with endless mountains and rivers, and the other half was a desert. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.